Welcome to Simplified UPSC by PPP, where we listen, learn, and grow together. Detailed lecture notes in English and Hindi, plus practice questions for prelims and mains, only on our Telegram channel. Link in description. Like and subscribe for more.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the only show that really takes that huge snack of sources you have. You know, the dense reports, the constitutional analysis, all the latest scientific stuff, and we try to turn it into clarity and context.
And we have a lot to get through today.
We really do. We've got a really comprehensive sweep of material, all pulled from the November 2025 updates. And they fundamentally get into the core architecture of the Indian state, its judicial challenges, and, well, its strategic evolution.
It's a huge scope. We're focusing heavily on how institutions are, evolving under pressure. These are classic governance and polity themes, the real machinery of the state.
Right.
But they're also tightly coupled with some critical updates on security, on tectonic risks, and even some pretty groundbreaking stuff in quantum physics.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to give you a deep, structured, and hopefully insightful update. We're going to spend a good amount of time extracting those crucial nuggets on, say, the stability of the constitutional framework. And then we'll immediately contrast that, that theoretical strength with the persistent, massive implementation challenges that the legal system is facing.
Like the docket explosion.
Exactly, the docket explosion. We want to deliver knowledge that actually sticks and shows you how these fields that seem totally separate from law to geology are, at the end of the day, linked through this theme of institutional capacity.
Yeah, our goal is to move beyond just a summary. When we're talking about high-stakes constitutional law or, complex science, the what is just the beginning.
Right.
We really want to deliver the why it matters, the connections that can elevate your understanding of governance and preparedness.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this by starting right at the foundation, the foundational pillar of the Republic. The sources are celebrating the Indian Constitution turning 76.
A huge milestone.
It is. I mean, in a region that's been marked by so much political instability, so many constitutional collapses, that's an incredible testament to its design. So I guess the core question is this. How has the Indian Constitution managed to survive and even thrive for almost 8 decades when so many neighboring constitutional schemes have, failed or been violently overturned or just become totally non-functional?
It's a fascinating question. And what's interesting is that the sources don't attribute this survival to just, simple luck.
Yeah.
They point directly to a specific kind of genius in the constitutional design.
Okay.
And that is the engineered balance between rigidity and flexibility.
That structural blend is so key, isn't it? Because a lot of older models, especially in the West, they started out almost impossibly rigid. And if you make it too difficult to change, the document just becomes a relic.
It can't address new realities.
Exactly. It can't deal with new social or economic challenges, and that leads to the whole institution just breaking.
Precisely. If a constitution is too rigid, like the original U.S. framework, for example, any radical adaptation requires something like a revolutionary change.
Yeah.
But India avoided that trap.
How so?
They incorporated mechanisms, and the key one here is Article 368, that allow for a whole spectrum of amendment procedures. So you can have easy changes for minor administrative things, but for the really fundamental structural alterations, the requirements get exponentially harder.
You need special majorities, state ratification.
Right, all of that. And this built-in adaptability is what's crucial for it to stay relevant without becoming fragile.
But I wonder, do the sources talk about the flip side? I mean, what stops a majority government armed with Article 368 from just fundamentally altering the Constitution's character and turning it into something unrecognizable? Doesn't that threaten its survival too?
That is the essential check, and this is where the real analytical depth comes in. The survival mechanism isn't just Article 368 on its own, it's the basic structure doctrine.
Ah, Kesavanda Farati, 1973.
The landmark case. The basic structure doctrine, or BSD, essentially says that Parliament's power to amend the Constitution is not unlimited. It can't be.
Yeah.
There are certain foundational, irreducible elements, things like judicial independence, secularism, federalism, that Parliament can never abolish.
So Article 368 gives you the power to change things.
But the basic structure doctrine defines the limits of that change.
It's like the ultimate constitutional identity protection.
It really acts as the final sentinel. By enshrining this doctrine that protects the Constitution's core identity, the courts ensure that India maintains its democratic, pluralistic character. It prevents the political winds of the day from just collapsing the entire institutional scheme.
And it's not just the text, is it?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's this judicial safeguard coupled with the presence of strong institutions like a robust election commission, the CAG, and of course the independent judiciary. That guarantees that continuity no matter how turbulent the politics get.
So beyond just surviving and maintaining that continuity, the sources describe the Indian Constitution as an instrument of transformative constitutionalism. That's a really powerful term.
It is.
It suggests the document is way more active than just a simple rulebook. What does that concept really mean for the governance structure?
It means the Constitution is imbued with revolutionary goals. It's not just designed to organize the state. It's designed to actively dismantle these entrenched social hierarchies and ensure substantive equality, not just formal equality on paper.
So it's an engine for social revolution.
That's a great way to put it. It moves the Constitution from being this passive framework to being an active command center for societal change.
And the Supreme Court has been central to that.
Absolutely. The Supreme Court, especially through mechanisms like public interest litigation or PIL, has been the primary vehicle driving this transformation. I mean, the initial text laid the foundation. You think of Article 17 abolishing untouchability or Article 15 prohibiting discrimination. But the courts have consistently used judicial review and PIL to expand the scope of rights far beyond just the literal text.
Can you give us a concrete example of that? Of the court using PIL to expand that transformative scope?
Sure. A perfect example is Article 21, the right to life. The text itself is very simple, but through a whole series of transformative rulings, many of them spurred by PILs, the Supreme Court has interpreted the right to life to include the right to a clean environment, the right to health, the right to speedy justice.
Even the right to decent working conditions.
Exactly. And this shows the Constitution's role in compelling the state to correct historical injustices and to deliver welfare and rights. It proves it's an engine for change, not just a static text.
Okay, so let's move from that foundational pillar to the implementation pillar, the judiciary. And this is where we see this immense challenge of scale. While the Constitution guarantees justice, the infrastructure really struggles to deliver it. The core problem has a fitting, if terrifying name, the docket explosion.
That phrase just captures the systemic failure perfectly. I mean, we are talking about a crisis of scale that literally paralyzes the delivery of rights.
And the number is just staggering.
Over 4.5 core pending cases across the system. This backlog isn't just some statistical anomaly. It's a denial of justice that impacts tens of millions of people. And it ultimately undermines public faith in the rule of law.
Yeah, if I'm a small business owner and I'm waiting 2 decades for a simple property dispute ruling, that constitutional right starts to feel like a bureaucratic joke, doesn't it? The delay itself becomes the punishment.
It absolutely does, and the Chief Justice of India has explicitly acknowledged this systemic breakdown. He's called for a comprehensive institutional solution.
Which is this proposed national judicial policy.
Exactly. A comprehensive NJP, the structural change that's being advocated for.
The word used in the sources was standardization, but that feels a bit broad for such a massive task. If we're looking for institutional detail, what are the key areas that a policy like this would actually standardize across the country?
That's the critical detail you need to focus on. An NJP isn't just about symptoms. It's a multi-pronged strategy aimed at fixing capacity. And it demands standardization in 5 key areas.
Okay, what are they?
First, uniform judicial officer recruitment, standardized exams, and strict timelines for filling vacancies, which addresses the root cause.
Makes sense.
Second, mandated infrastructure spending, ensuring every state allocates an adequate budget for court buildings for living quarters. Third, integration of IT systems, the eCourts project, making it mandatory to use unified, digitized case management platforms to cut down on procedural delays.
So everyone's on the same page, technologically.
Right. Fourth, uniform rules for court working hours, standardizing the number of days courts work and coordinating annual vacations. And finally, fifth, standardized case management techniques, implementing similar methods for listing cases, for grouping them, prioritizing them across different judicial levels.
So it's really about treating the judiciary as one cohesive national system, guaranteeing predictable, consistent justice, no matter which state you happen to live in.
Precisely. The CJI's view is that consistency, predictability, efficiency, these aren't luxuries. They are constitutional requirements. A right that's guaranteed by the Constitution is basically meaningless if it's slow or inconsistent or just inaccessible because of administrative chaos.
Now, where does this massive pendency even start? We always end up talking about the Supreme Court, but I suspect the real crisis is much, much closer to the ground.
Oh, absolutely. If the judiciary is a pyramid, the lower judiciary, so the district and subordinate courts, that's the massive base. That's where 90% of the public interfaces with the law.
And that backbone is structurally weak.
It is. The overwhelming pendency, those 4.5 crore cases, that lies squarely in the high vacancy rates within the lower judiciary. It's the critical, understaffed layer.
It really is.
These are the courts that handle the bulk of civil suits, family disputes, magistrate cases. If that entry-level layer is operating at, say, 60 or 70% capacity, the bottleneck just pushes the entire system to a grinding halt. You simply cannot solve the crisis at the High Court or Supreme Court level without first fixing the staffing and capacity shortage at the bottom.
So the NJP has to prioritize recruitment there first.
It has to. Rapid, uniform recruitment and training for the lower judiciary has to be the #1 priority.
This inherent tension between capacity and independence, it brings us to another really high-stakes clash. The Tribunal Reforms Act showdown.
Right.
This is a classic example of the executive trying to, streamline efficiency and the judiciary fighting back to protect its institutional autonomy. What was the central conflict when the Supreme Court struck down key provisions of that 2021 Act?
The underlying tension was executive overreach, plain and simple. The Supreme Court found that the government had essentially tried to reenact provisions that the courts had already found unconstitutional in previous rulings.
So they just changed them slightly and tried again.
Pretty much. They altered them a little, but without actually curing the fundamental constitutional defects.
That sounds like a very clear institutional signal from the Supreme Court, basically saying, we see what you're doing, and we won't tolerate a workaround strategy that undermines our directions.
That is precisely the message. The source material explicitly links the provisions that were struck down to a violation of the fundamental doctrine of separation of powers and judicial independence.
So, for the listener, just to provide some context, tribunals are these quasi-judicial bodies, right? Set up under Articles 323A and 323B to provide specialized and speedy justice in specific fields.
Exactly, like tax, environment, administrative service matters. 323A is for administrative tribunals specifically, and 323B handles all the other types.
So why is it so crucial that the executive doesn't control how they function?
Because the union government is almost always the largest litigant in front of these tribunals. So if the executive controls the appointment, the tenure, and the service conditions of the very members who are supposed to be judging the executive's actions,
The neutrality of the whole system is gone.
instantly compromised, yes.
So what specific mechanisms did the executive try to control that the Supreme Court found so objectionable? Let's get into the details of that institutional subversion.
Well, the court cited several problematic areas. First, they created selection committees where the executive had overwhelming dominance over the judicial members.
Okay.
Second, they tied the service conditions and pay scales of tribunal members to those of equivalent civil servants. Now, this fundamentally subordinates the judicial function to the executive hierarchy. It makes tribunal members beholden to the government for their career advancement or security.
And what about tenure? Why are the specifics around tenure so critical?
The court clarified that judicial directions on minimum tenure, which is often mandated at 5 years, or eligibility, like requiring a minimum of 10 years practice as an advocate, these aren't just advisory guidelines.
They're constitutional requirements.
They are constitutional requirements. They flow directly from the basic structure doctrine's guarantee of judicial independence. If a member's tenure is short or their eligibility is questionable, they're much more vulnerable to executive pressure, and that diminishes the quality and the impartiality of justice.
So the Supreme Court is really positioning itself as the uncompromising custodian of the separation of powers. It's forcing the executive to respect the constitutional scheme, even when the executive is arguing it's just trying to be more efficient.
It's the ultimate constitutional check. They are saying independence is non-negotiable. The solution to inefficiency, as the source suggests, is transparent, merit-based appointments, robust infrastructure, and clear criteria, not institutional capture by the executive.
This whole discussion on capacity, backlog, and quality, it flows directly into this persistent challenge of legal aid. Justice may be a constitutional guarantee, but does that guarantee extend equally to the poor?
A huge question.
And the core directive here is pretty straightforward. Article 39A.
Article 39A is the constitutional backbone for this entire guarantee. It's a directive principle of state policy, a DPSP, and it places a positive obligation on the state. It mandates the state to ensure the legal system promotes justice on a basis of equal opportunity.
And it specifically says.
It specifically says the state must provide free legal aid to ensure that the opportunity to secure justice is not denied to any citizen just because of economic or other disabilities.
So the constitutional mandate is crystal clear. Your economic status cannot be a barrier to accessing your rights. So what mechanism did Parliament set up to deliver on this promise?
That mechanism is the comprehensive tiered structure that was established by the NALSA Act of 1987. That's the National Legal Services Authority. NALSA operates at the top, at the apex, but the services flow down through this multi-level structure designed to cover the entire country.
So it goes from the national level
Down to the state legal services authorities, then down to the district legal services authorities, and finally, right down to the taluk level.
On paper, that structure sounds magnificent. It guarantees that theoretically no citizen, whether they're a woman, a child, a member of a scheduled caste or tribe, or just economically backward, should have to face a court without a lawyer simply because they're poor.
The framework is geographically comprehensive, yes, and its statutory purpose is to provide holistic aid, including representation in criminal, civil, and even administrative matters.
But there's always a but.
There is.
Yeah.
Despite this robust structure, the promise often fails at the delivery level.
So if the will is there in Article 39A and the statutory structure is there with NALSA, where exactly does the deficit happen in practice? Where is the capacity gap?
The major flaw, and the source is very clear on this, is purely a matter of execution, and critically, the quality of the legal aid lawyers. The aid that's provided is frequently just mere technical compliance.
You get a lawyer appointed.
You get a lawyer, but that lawyer might be overworked, poorly paid, they might lack specialization or be inexperienced, and all of that leads to inherently inferior representation.
That disparity is a direct betrayal of the constitutional goal. We need to remember that poignant phrase the sources use to describe this problem.
I remember it well.
For the poor, the law is often poor.
That sentence just perfectly captures the substantive failure. It tells us that providing a statutory framework just isn't enough. The system has to ensure the quality of advocacy actually matches the promise of equal justice. If the quality of defense for the disadvantaged is systematically inferior, well, the playing field is still tilted, and the lofty ideals of Article 39A remain compromised by reality.
So what's the fix?
It requires better funding, standardized training, and real accountability mechanisms for the legal professionals who are involved in the NALSA scheme. At its heart, it's an institutional capacity problem, not a textual one.
Okay, let's use that thematic thread of institutional integrity to pivot to the operational side of governance. We can start with a fascinating little nugget from the source material about the powers of the Attorney General of India, the AGI.
The AGI is a very unique figure. Appointed by the president, he or she is the government's chief legal advisor. But their functional rights within Parliament are often confused with those of elected members.
Okay, let's nail this essential institutional detail down. What can the AGI do within the framework of Lok Sabha proceedings, and what's the crucial restriction?
The sources clarify 4 key rights that give the AGI significant access. First, the AGI can take part in the proceedings of either House of Parliament.
Okay.
They can also speak in the Lok Sabha. Furthermore, the AGI can be named and can function as a member of a committee of the Lok Sabha.
But the crucial part.
Crucially, the AGI absolutely cannot vote. They have all the rights and privileges they need to advise and inform, but they maintain their status as a non-elected council. It prevents them from directly influencing legislative decision-making.
An essential functional distinction. They're the legal brain, not the legislative decision maker.
Exactly.
Next, another area full of institutional tension that impacts the democratic process. The governor's role under Article 200, which is the power to give assent to bills passed by a state legislature. We often see these political standoffs where governors just delay assent indefinitely.
All the time.
So what did the Supreme Court recently clarify about the limits of these powers?
This clarification was absolutely critical because these political standoffs often lead to legislative paralysis. The Supreme Court stepped in to ensure that the constitutional functionary, the governor, cannot misuse their position to effectively, negate the will of the elected state legislature.
So they're stopping this legislative limbo.
Yes, the core ruling addressed the creation of that limbo. And the judicial hammer blow against that practice was that the court ruled unequivocally that prolonged, unexplained, indefinite inaction by a governor regarding a bill is unconstitutional.
And it's subject to judicial review.
Subject to judicial review. A bill cannot simply languish indefinitely in a desk drawer. That delay is fundamentally undermining the democratic process that Article 200 is meant to facilitate.
But the sources noted a crucial nuance here. The court can review the inaction, but they didn't set a hard deadline for the assent, did they? Nor did they force the bill into law.
Exactly. And this is where you can see the court being very reluctant to cross that separation of powers line. The SC explicitly rejected the idea of deemed assent, which is the idea that a bill automatically becomes law after a certain amount of time.
Well, why did they reject it?
They said they can't use their extraordinary power under Article 142, the power to do complete justice, to just bypass the constitutional procedure that's mandated by Article 200. And what's more, the court can't impose fixed timelines because the Constitution itself only requires the governor to act as soon as possible.
Which is deliberately vague. So the courts can review the fact of the delay, but they can't micromanage the speed of the action, nor can they challenge the substance of the governor's decision.
That's the crucial distinction. Courts can review the governor's inaction to make sure the constitutional process is followed, preventing political obstruction. But they cannot question the merits of the governor's decision to withhold assent or to reserve the bill for the president. The power to assess a law's constitutional validity only comes after it's received assent and been enacted, not while it's still a pending bill.
Okay, let's shift gears dramatically. From constitutional procedure to strategic resilience and national preparation. Starting with a crucial update on India's disaster preparedness. The revised Earthquake Design Code of 2025. This sounds like a necessary but concerning update.
It is a profound institutional shift, and it's driven by hard geological science and updated risk assessments. The Bureau of Indian Standards, the BIS, has revised the code and introduced the highest risk category we've ever had, Zone 6.
Zone 6. What makes this new zone necessary, and where is it concentrated?
This new designation reflects the intense tectonic stress that's been accumulating for decades. The source material is very specific that the entire Himalayan arc, stretching laterally across the northern border, from J&K and Ladakh all the way across to Arunachal Pradesh, is now in Zone 6 for the first time.
The entire arc.
The entire arc. It reflects the latest scientific assessment of rupture potential and the persistent extreme stress along the collision zone of the Indian and Eurasian plates.
Wow. Placing that vast, ecologically sensitive, and strategically vital region in the maximum hazard zone must trigger monumental changes in infrastructure planning and construction.
The implications are massive, both fiscally and structurally. First, the update means that 61% of India is now officially classified in moderate to high hazard zones. That's zones 3, 4V, and now 6.
And for Zone 6 itself?
For Zone 6, it necessitates mandatory, rigorous structural and non-structural safety norms. They go far, far beyond standard earthquake proofing.
Can you give an example of those rigorous non-structural norms? What exactly has to be secured that wasn't before?
It gets highly detailed. The new norms mandate the anchoring and securing of elements like external facades, parapets, ceilings, water tanks, and large mechanical units like HVA systems, especially if their weight exceeds 1% of the total floor load.
I see. Because it's a recognition that during an earthquake, it's often the falling non-structural elements that cause significant death and injury.
Exactly. And secondly, putting the entire Himalayan arc in this zone will dramatically increase construction costs across the region. It also necessitates mandatory retrofitting and structural audits for existing critical infrastructure. This is a monumental effort to improve institutional resilience against high-magnitude events.
Speaking of the Himalayas and strategic preparedness, let's move to a critical development near the contested border, the Nyoma Airbase. Where exactly is it, and what does its operationalization mean for India's defense posture?
Nyoma Airbase is located at a dizzying altitude of 13,700 feet in eastern Ladakh. It's strategically situated near the southern bank of Pangong Tso Lake, and it's only about 30 kilometers from the line of actual control, the LAC, with China.
That extreme altitude makes its operational capacity hugely significant. What kind of capacity does it actually offer the armed forces?
Its importance comes from its design capacity. It's being built to handle fighter jets and heavy transport aircraft, not just light logistics planes. And that capability at that altitude is a game changer. It provides a crucial strategic edge for air mobility, allowing for rapid deployment, resupply, and a much quicker response near the contested border.
It's a symbol of growing institutional capacity.
It is. It shows India's capacity to build and sustain high-altitude, integrated infrastructure alongside existing airfields like Leh and Dali Bagoldi.
Now, this expansion is often linked to an updated military doctrine, specifically moving from the theoretical cold start concept towards the operational reality of cold strike. Can you clearly differentiate between those two for us?
Sure, this differentiation is really essential to understanding India's strategic posture. Cold Start was a doctrine conceived after the 2001 Parliament attack. It was a rigid, potentially escalatory plan, focusing on launching swift, limited conventional offensives deep into Pakistani territory.
And it relied on mobilizing existing formations.
Right, which was its weakness.
Mm.
It was theoretical and often criticized for the time it required for mobilization and its inherent risk of nuclear escalation.
So how does cold strike differ, particularly in the context of a base like Nyoma?
Cold Strike is the evolution of that idea. It's far more flexible, more integrated, and it's readiness-focused. It centers on rapid, decisive, limited war operations that happen under the nuclear umbrella, but they are carefully calibrated to avoid crossing escalation thresholds.
And Nyoma's role in this?
Nyoma is critical here because it supports the rapid deployment and resupply of specialized forces, particularly forces optimized for mountain warfare like the Rudra brigades. Nyoma is the critical airborne artery that feeds that enhanced readiness. It significantly reduces response time in a crisis.
All right, let's shift entirely. We'll do a rapid-fire exploration of environmental philosophy and some cutting-edge science, but we'll maintain our thematic thread of institutional capacity, whether that capacity is governmental or scientific. Let's start with a beautiful concept: conservation as coexistence.
I love this idea.
The sources suggest we need to redefine conservation away from this idea of strict exclusion.
It's a powerful paradigm-shifting idea in environment policy. The traditional model, which was often imported from Western conservation efforts, it relies on creating these strictly regulated protected zones and just excluding human populations.
Right.
Conservation as coexistence argues that biodiversity can actually thrive where local communities remain as active stewards integrating human and animal welfare.
So do we have a strong, successful case study in India that proves this co-management model actually works at scale?
We do, and it involves the Asiatic lion in the Gir landscape in Gujarat. The data is conclusive. Nearly half of the Asiatic lions now thrive outside the boundaries of the Gir National Park itself. They're sharing the space with human communities.
How is that even possible, given that lions are apex predators?
It's directly attributed to the tolerance of the Muldari pastoralists. The local community, which lives by raising livestock, has a cultural acceptance and respect for the predator. And this cultural tolerance is supported by highly efficient, government-backed compensation systems for any livestock loss.
So the institutional capacity, the state ensuring rapid, fair compensation that blends with indigenous knowledge and tolerance.
And it ensures sustainable coexistence. It proves that co-management, not exclusion, can ensure robust biodiversity maintenance.
Okay, let's leap from community ecology to the absolute forefront of physics. India has announced a major indigenous breakthrough: the successful demonstration of a long-distance quantum key distribution network, QKD.
This is huge.
What exactly is this technology, and why is this 500-kilometer demonstration so significant?
Well, QKD is revolutionary for secure communication because it uses the fundamental, immutable laws of quantum physics to guarantee the secrecy of an encryption key. And the sources confirm India successfully demonstrated its first 500-kilometer QKD network deployed over existing optical fiber infrastructure. That proves indigenous capability at a metropolitan scale.
So traditional encryption, that relies on mathematical complexity. QKD relies on physics. How does it guarantee that no one has intercepted the key?
This is the technically fascinating part. QKD transmits the key using single photons, individual particles of light. Each photon is encoded with a key bit using its polarization.
Like horizontal, vertical, diagonal?
No. If an eavesdropper tries to observe or measure the polarization of that photon to steal the key, the very act of measurement instantly alters the quantum state of that photon. That's according to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
So interception isn't just detected later. The act of eavesdropping literally destroys the key, and it alerts the sender and receiver instantly.
Exactly. The communication protocol immediately detects the disturbance and aborts the transmission, discarding the corrupted key. QKD doesn't encrypt the message itself. It guarantees the integrity of the key transmission. And that makes it inherently quantum safe against even the most powerful future quantum computers.
Which poses severe theoretical threat to our current cryptography.
A huge threat.
All right, this is where it gets really interesting on the cosmic scale. Let's talk about theoretical physics and black hole morsels. What are these morsels, and why are physicists so excited about the theoretical possibility of detecting them?
These are tiny theoretical micro-black holes. They're much smaller than stellar mass black holes. They might have the mass of an asteroid, but they're squeezed down to the size of an atom.
Wow.
And the theory suggests these could have been formed in the most violent cosmic collisions, particularly in the very early universe, or through extreme contemporary processes.
And their small size is what makes them a big deal for physics, right?
That's the key link. According to theory, black holes are not perfectly black. And because they're so small, these morsels would shine faintly via Hawking radiation.
The quantum energy that's predicted to be emitted by black holes?
Right. And this radiation is typically way too weak to detect in massive black holes. But for micro black holes, it would be proportionally stronger. And what's more, as these morsels eventually evaporate completely, they would release a final, powerful flash of energy. Detectable gamma ray bursts.
So detecting that final gamma ray burst would be the smoking gun.
It would provide the first real-world empirical test of quantum gravity, which is the critical missing link in physics that's trying to unify Einstein's general relativity and quantum mechanics. These morsels act as natural cosmic labs far beyond anything we could ever build or simulate.
Sticking with mysterious cosmic phenomena, we have the odd radio circles, or ORCs. What are they, and what did citizen scientists recently discover using LOFAR telescope data?
ORCs are one of the most puzzling modern astronomical discoveries. They are vast, mysterious, circular structures that are visible only in radio wavelengths. They appear to be these colossal rings of radio emission surrounding distant galaxies.
And a team of citizen scientists found one.
A team led by citizen scientists from India's RAD at-home astronomy group discovered a rare twin ORC2 circles appearing side by side using LOFAR data. And this is only the second such known instance in the world.
That is a staggering discovery. What's the leading hypothesis? They're too big to be supernova remnants, I assume.
No, much too big. They are orders of magnitude larger than typical galactic structures. The current hypothesis is that they result from powerful, extreme shock waves caused by catastrophic galactic events.
Like what?
Think massive, energetic outflows from galactic cores, maybe triggered by the merger of supermassive black holes. Their very existence is challenging our existing models of galactic explosions and evolution. It's forcing astrophysicists to reconsider the scale and frequency of these energetic phenomena in the universe.
We'll wrap up the science and ecology section with a few high-interest facts pulled from the sources. Let's start with a creature that's been dubbed the Einstein of the bird world.
That would be the African gray parrot. It's recognized globally for its extraordinary intelligence, its ability to acquire a large vocabulary, and its capability for contextual speech and mimicry.
Ecologically important, too.
Yes, as a significant seed disperser in its natal habitat. But critically, the sources note it is one of the world's most trafficked parrots because of high demand in the exotic pet trade, which is severely endangering its wild populations.
Next up, an archaeological nugget from the Indus Valley Civilization, the IVC. It provides crucial context when you compare it to other ancient civilizations. What were some of its key characteristics?
Well, the IVC stands out in several ways compared to, say, Egypt or Mesopotamia.
Sure.
Archaeological evidence suggests they worship both male and female deities.
Yep.
Crucially, they were a highly sophisticated urban civilization, but they did not possess great palaces and temples. Their focus was on complex infrastructure and urban planning, not monumental religious or royal architecture.
And in warfare.
They did not employ horse-drawn chariots in warfare, unlike their Middle Eastern contemporaries.
And finally, a geography puzzle that always comes up. The Narmada River. Why does the Narmada flow west into the Arabian Sea when most other large peninsular rivers, like the Godavari and Krishna, flow east?
This is a purely geological distinction. It just overrides the general slope of the peninsula. The Narmada is an anomaly because it occupies a linear rift valley, a depressed block of land bordered by parallel faults. And that geological structure dictates its course, forcing it to flow westward between the Vindhyas and the Satpuras rather than following the general eastward slope toward the Bay of Bengal.
That was a deep dive that really spanned the Constitution, the intricacies of the courts, seismic codes, military strategy, cutting-edge quantum physics, and global health threats. We truly covered the entire spectrum of institutional performance today.
We really did. We saw how the living document continues to be protected by the basic structure doctrine, but it's constantly being tested by institutional infighting.
Right, like the Governor-Supreme Court standoff over Bill Assent or the Executive-Judiciary clash over tribunal appointments.
And we analyzed India's strategic response to external pressures, upgrading air mobility at Nyoma, embracing next-generation tech like QKD for cybersecurity. And environmentally, we saw that critical, expensive shift in recognizing the entire Himalayan arc as a high-hazard Zone 6.
What stands out most profoundly for me is this recurring theme of the capacity to implement justice. The constitutional framework is robust. You've got Article 39A guaranteeing legal aid and NALSA billing the framework, but the execution just falters so dramatically.
Yeah.
It's illustrated by that 4.5 crore case backlog and the persistent structural quality gap in legal aid.
That's the crux of the matter, isn't it? The pursuit of justice, from the highest Supreme Court rulings down to the ground-level services, is this ongoing struggle against administrative inertia, human capacity deficits, and just the sheer scale of the population.
The framework is strong on paper,
But constantly challenged by the application. The government sees the need for efficiency. The court demands constitutional independence. And the average citizen just wants timely justice.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you track governance in India?
Well, this raises an important and I think actionable question. If we accept that the constitutional rights granted to citizens are primarily diminished by delays and inadequate enforcement capacity, and not by flaws in the text itself, then what specific measurable institutional indicators should you, the well-informed citizen, track in the next quarter to gauge genuine reform progress?
So don't look at the abstract statements.
Exactly. Instead, track the implementation status of that standardized national judicial policy. Look for reported judicial officer recruitment rates, look for the mandatory budget allocations for IT integration and infrastructure, and the expansion of training for legal aid attorneys. Only by tracking this capacity data can we determine if the promise of the Constitution is truly moving closer to the reality of equal justice. That gap between promise and capacity remains the most critical challenge facing India's governance structure today.
A compelling and actionable note to end on. Thank you for diving deep with us today. We'll catch you next time.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take that crucial stack of sources you provide and, well, we extract the golden nuggets of insight, offering you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. Today, we are on, I'd say, an urgent recall mission. We're focusing on 3 major high-impact themes that really show how quickly our world's foundational assumptions are being redefined. And that's whether those foundations are social, economic, or even, environmental.
It's a really remarkable set of source material you've compiled, because at their heart, all 3 of these topics are dealing with resource allocation and, I think, entrenched vulnerability in the modern world.
Right.
And what's truly fascinating is how these seemingly disparate areas, so technology access, global trade, local ecology, they all sort of converge on these shared questions of scarcity, of control, and deep-seated inequality. We aren't just summarizing headlines here. We're really trying to dissect the underlying structural mechanisms that are creating the next generation of social and geopolitical stratification.
That's absolutely the mission. We have 3 distinct areas to cover, each with its own powerful memory hook to help you lock this down. First, we're discussing the widening social and economic gap caused by unequal tech access. We're calling this one the new inequality. Then we'll pivot pretty dramatically, actually, to the new geopolitical fight over the raw materials that are displacing traditional energy. Our second hook for that is the new oil. And finally, we're going to delve into a crucial, a hyper-local environmental crisis that's threatening one of the world's largest urban centers.
Right.
We've distilled that one down to a bureaucratic and deeply symbolic phrase, Garmumkin Pahar.
And these hooks, they're really designed to stick with you, to help lock down the essential facts for quick recall, especially when you think about the broader context of, say, societal challenges or resource distribution. For instance, when we discuss social empowerment, often referred to as GS1 in broader study, these themes are just central.
And the policy implications, too.
Exactly. The discussion on, say, e-governance limitations or the effectiveness of government initiatives that fall squarely under policy, or GS2, we're connecting these, theoretical concepts of governance to immediate real-world consequences.
Okay, let's dive straight into the first theme then. Our sources begin by analyzing the digital divide, but specifically across caste and class lines. And they offer this crucial distinction that moves way beyond just simple statistics about, how many people have a phone. They introduce this powerful concept of the new inequality.
And that distinction is, I think, the foundational concept for understanding modern stratification, because when you see these global reports, they often talk about digital access using one core data point, internet penetration.
Right, which basically just means how many people own a smartphone or have access to some kind of mobile data.
Precisely. And the analysis you've provided, it challenges this severely. It highlights that while that simple penetration number might look pretty robust on a chart, true meaningful access is just severely skewed. And this is where that real societal chasm, the new inequality, really starts to emerge.
It's the difference between, I guess, owning a tool and actually being able to use it for high-value tasks, isn't it? I sort of think of it as the difference between owning a single wrench and owning a full mechanic's garage with all the diagnostic equipment.
That is a perfect analogy.
A wrench is useful, sure, but the whole garage is what secures your economic future.
It is, because meaningful access in this context is defined by the quality of the tools and the connectivity you need for real economic and educational participation. We're not talking about, checking WhatsApp or passively watching a YouTube video on a really slow 3G connection.
Yeah.
We are talking about the capacity to engage in complex, productive tasks.
So let's get specific then.
Okay.
What exactly defines this quality, this meaningful access?
Well, it really requires three things that are inherently more expensive and, less mobile than just a simple phone. First, you need dedicated computing devices. Laptops, desktops.
The heavy machinery.
Yes. They're essential for running specialized software. Think video editing, data analysis, architectural design, even complex coding. You can't do that on a phone.
Okay, so that's one. What's the second?
Second is reliable, high-speed broadband connections. Preferably fiber, or at least a high-quality fixed wireless. This is, it's non-negotiable for video conferencing, for transferring large files, for accessing secure government or corporate networks.
And the third piece?
Finally, and this is one people often forget, a quiet, dedicated workspace. If a person is sharing a phone in a crowded, noisy, single-room home, they just cannot participate in a professional Zoom meeting or focus on complex academic research. It's impossible.
And the data, it's pretty emphatic on this point, isn't it? That the availability of this specific quality of access is just heavily concentrated. Yeah. It's skewed toward upper castes and higher socioeconomic classes.
It's heavily concentrated among the elite, yes. And this is so critical because it basically ensures that the benefits of this rapidly accelerating digital economy, they flow overwhelmingly to those who already possess social capital, financial resources, and, inherited privilege.
So the infrastructure itself follows the existing power structures.
Exactly. The infrastructure that supports high-level digital engagement, the high-speed fiber lines, the specialized hardware, the access to educational mentorship, it remains an elite commodity, and that locks out the masses.
And this is where the analysis stops being purely statistical, and I think it becomes genuinely structural.
Yeah.
This unequal access isn't just a reflection of current wealth. It actively creates friction that magnifies pre-existing social stratification and limits future mobility.
That is the crucial insight. This inequality functions as a structural gatekeeper. If you just look at the last 5 years, you can break down the practical impacts across three major societal domains where this chasm is having these profound real-world consequences.
Okay, let's start with the one that affects the largest number of people. Education. The forced shift to online classes during recent global crises was a massive natural experiment in digital inequality.
And the results were, they were devastatingly clear. Marginalized groups, particularly children in poor rural areas, they suffered this acute and often irreversible learning loss.
Can you give us a practical example of how that played out?
Sure. Consider a family with 2 or 3 school-age children in a low-income household. They might have a single, cheap smartphone that's shared among all of them. So if the teachers are demanding live video classes, how can 3 children simultaneously attend?
They can't.
They can't. The simple lack of personal devices and reliable broadband meant that for so many, education simply stopped during the crisis. The privileged child had a dedicated laptop, a quiet room, and a fiber connection. The marginalized child had a shared 3G phone and was struggling to even download the homework.
And that learning loss, it just compounds so rapidly.
Yeah.
And the digital tools that are needed for vocational training, especially in modern trades,
Yeah.
graphic design, data entry, they're all software-based now.
Exactly. When we talk about specialized education in the 21st century, we're talking about running complex CAD software or high-level statistical analysis programs. These things require high processing power and stable connectivity.
So if your foundation is already shaky,
Then your entry point into the higher-skilled vocational market is effectively blocked. The digital chasm just exacerbates existing educational disparities, and really, it creates a technological ceiling for upward mobility.
and that structural barrier then extends directly into the modern labor market, doesn't it? It impacts which jobs people can even apply for.
Oh, absolutely. The second major impact is on jobs, specifically the high-value job market. The ability to engage in work from home or to participate in the flexible, higher-paying service economy is entirely restricted by a lack of these meaningful digital tools.
So you mean things like secure networks and constant connectivity?
Think about the types of jobs that offer high salaries and good benefits. They involve secure virtual private networks, VPNs, they have demanding video conference schedules, continuous data handling. These cannot be performed effectively or securely or reliably on a shared, outdated smartphone.
So those stuck on the wrong side of this divide are, in a way, perpetually restricted to the precarious, low-wage, or informal sectors, even if they have the intellectual capacity for better work.
That's precisely the outcome. The digital realm has created a new class barrier. You have those who are digitally mobile and can access the global high-value economy, and then you have those who are geographically and digitally tethered to low-wage local labor.
It's a new form of immobility.
It is. The unequal access restricts entry into the most dynamic parts of the economy, ensuring that the existing wealth gap widens through digital means.
And the third critical area you mentioned is health. This is a big one, especially with the post-pandemic acceleration of digital health systems. Telemedicine was promised as this great equalizer for rural and remote populations.
And in theory, it is. I mean, the idea is fantastic. Telemedicine is meant to bridge geographical gaps, allowing specialists in cities to diagnose patients hundreds of miles away. But then you look at the requirements.
Right.
It needs high-resolution video for an accurate remote diagnosis. It needs secure channels for transferring sensitive patient data. And it needs consistent connectivity for follow-up monitoring. If that foundational requirement, reliable network and device access, is missing, telemedicine doesn't bridge the gap. It actually reinforces existing health disparities.
Which means that poorer and rural populations are excluded from things like preventative care tracking, remote diagnostics, even basic digital health records management, simply because they can't afford the data plans or the necessary devices.
Yes. The data suggests that a lack of consistent digital presence means exclusion from modern health infrastructure. So the digital health push, which was intended to democratize healthcare, ironically becomes another layer of exclusion.
So if we connect all these dots, education, jobs, health, the core finding from these sources seems to be that digital tools, rather than being instruments of democratization, are becoming primary sources of structural exclusion.
That's the entire argument distilled. That's it. They are preventing the marginalized from participating fully in the modern economy. They're cementing social hierarchies rather than breaking them down.
It creates a feedback loop.
It establishes a harsh economic feedback loop. Poor access leads to acute learning loss, which then leads to restriction from high-value job markets, which cements poor access and low economic opportunity for the next generation. This loop is accelerating the separation of classes.
And this high degree of technological stratification is why the sources use such a striking and potent term to describe it. They call it digital apartheid.
It is an intentionally provocative and powerful term. When you use the word apartheid, you are invoking a system of institutionalized structural segregation and discrimination.
It's a heavy word.
A very heavy word. By applying it to the digital realm, the sources are implying the creation of effectively two Indias, or you could say two global classes. One is technologically empowered, globally integrated, and mobile, enjoying all the benefits of the modern digital state. And the other is structurally excluded from the digital infrastructure that is necessary for opportunity.
So it suggests this division isn't just a consequence of historical poverty, but it's being actively maintained by the current unequal distribution of these critical resources, like bandwidth and hardware.
Precisely. It frames digital exclusion as a systemic policy failure rather than just an unfortunate outcome. And the policy implication is that merely subsidizing mobile phones it's insufficient.
Not enough.
Not nearly enough. The focus must shift to ensuring state support for laptops and dedicated fiber access for marginalized communities. We have to start treating meaningful access as a basic public utility, like water or electricity.
And this analysis, it provides very clear markers for anyone examining governance and social policy, doesn't it?
It connects directly to the foundational concepts of social empowerment, which is GS1. You have to discuss the digital divide as the most significant contemporary challenge to achieving true equality. It shifts the traditional discussion of resource allocation to the infrastructure of knowledge.
And for governance.
Secondly, it's vital for understanding the limitations of e-governance, or GS2. If the state deploys sophisticated digital public delivery systems like direct benefit transfers or online grievance portals, how can they achieve maximum effectiveness if the target beneficiaries, the rural poor and lower classes, fundamentally lack the meaningful tools to access those services consistently?
The system fails.
The system fails not because the technology is poor, but because the exclusion is structural.
A deeply, deeply troubling reflection on the path of modernization. Okay, now, we're going to shift dramatically from this societal layer of access to the geopolitical fight over the very materials that enable that access. Let's move our focus and our memory hook to the new oil. So, for the last century, global politics, conflicts, alliances, it all revolved around access to fossil fuels. Today, that reliance is shifting, and this phrase, the new oil, really captures the essence of that change.
Yeah.
So why are these specific minerals, lithium, cobalt, graphite, and the various rare earths, why are they the new focus of global power?
Well, the simple answer is that they are absolutely crucial for the technological future, just as traditional oil was for the industrial past. The global shift away from fossil fuels toward electrified systems in transportation, defense, computing, energy storage, it means that humanity is basically exchanging one finite resource dependency for a new one.
It's a substitution.
It is. These critical minerals are the foundational ingredients for the 21st century economy. Without them, the green energy transition stalls and our advanced defense systems, they fail to function.
So let's nail down that definition of criticality. What makes these elements so strategically vital?
Their criticality, it really stems from their unique magnetic, conductive, and catalytic properties. They are, for now, irreplaceable in high-performance applications across three key sectors.
Okay, what's the first one?
Firstly, electric vehicles, or EVs. They are essential for the high-density energy storage required in batteries. That's your lithium, cobalt, graphite, nickel. And, crucially, for the permanent magnets used in the motor components, which use a lot of rare earths, like neodymium.
Okay, so transportation is number one.
Number two, defense. Advanced weapons systems, precision guidance technology, specialized radars, electronic warfare, communication satellites. They all rely on these materials for miniaturization, for stealth, for high performance. Many rare earth elements are simply irreplaceable in sophisticated optical and sensor systems.
And the third?
And thirdly, high tech. Semiconductors, advanced computing, specialized alloys for aerospace, fiber optics, advanced medical imaging, all of these require specific, highly purified critical minerals.
It's fascinating. We are mobilizing to shift away from the old oil, but at the same time, we're just pivoting our reliance to a new set of finite, geologically concentrated resources that present entirely new and, perhaps even more acute geopolitical vulnerabilities.
The problem isn't solved, it's relocated. The security risk shifts from a few large oil-producing nations to a few key nations that control two things: the raw extraction and, more importantly, the high-tech processing of these minerals.
And that brings us directly to the main strategic vulnerability that the sources identify, this extreme concentration of processing power globally.
Exactly.
This is the data point that, it should really alarm every national security and energy planner. The sources detail this really alarming concentration of refining capacity.
Indeed. The analysis states that one nation, China, controls approximately 60 to 80% of the global processing capacity for these critical minerals?
60 to 80%.
And that's not just the raw mining. This is the capital-intensive, technologically sophisticated step of refining and manufacturing. This includes turning raw ore into usable, high-purity, battery-grade cathode material, or creating the specialized permanent magnets that power everything, from EV motors to guided missiles.
So wait, isn't mining the raw material enough to protect a nation?
Yeah.
If a country like the US or Australia has huge reserves of rare earths, why is the processing step the real choke point? Why is controlling the processing so much more powerful than controlling the extraction?
That is the essential friction point. While countries like Australia or the US might mine the raw ore, the refining process is where the high margin value addition and the specialized intellectual property reside.
Oh, okay.
Processing these materials is often dirty, it can be environmentally toxic, and it requires enormous capital investment and technological expertise to achieve the necessary purity. We're talking, for instance, 99.99% purity for battery-grade materials.
So how exactly did China achieve this 60 to 80% dominance? It couldn't have happened overnight.
No, it was a decades-long, deliberate strategic initiative. You can really point to three main factors. First, state subsidies and long-term planning. Beijing saw this coming decades ago and just poured massive state capital into building out infrastructure and acquiring refining know-how. They often operated at a loss in the short term to gain long-term market share.
A long game.
A very long game. Second, what you might call environmental compliance arbitrage. The refining process for many of these minerals, especially rare earths, generates significant toxic waste. China historically operated with much less stringent environmental regulations than Western nations.
So they could do it cheaper.
Much cheaper and faster, which drove out global competition. And third, the aggressive acquisition of refining technology and patents over the last 20 years, securing the specialized knowledge needed for advanced separation and manufacturing.
So this dominance in processing means that even if a nation mines the material, they have to ship it away to be processed and then sent back. That creates massive dependency.
Exactly. The supply chain leverage remains heavily tilted. This dependency poses a massive, multifaceted strategic risk for the global energy transition, which is relying on scaling this tech rapidly and, crucially, for defense preparedness.
So any geopolitical friction could be weaponized.
Immediately. It could translate into weaponized supply chain disruptions for crucial technologies, effectively throttling economic and strategic growth globally.
It fundamentally raises the question for global leaders. I mean, how does a nation achieve true strategic autonomy if the core components for its next-generation technology, from EVs to advanced sensors, are controlled by another nation that might become a rival?
Autonomy vanishes. It becomes a myth that's tied to commodity prices and political stability in Beijing. And this acute necessity for autonomy is what's driving all these counter-strategies globally, including India's proactive response to mitigate this vulnerability.
Okay, so India's response. It focuses on two major strategic pillars, starting with external alliances, right?
The external strategy is encapsulated by India, joining the MSP, which is the Minerals Security Partnership. This is an alliance led by nations like the US, Australia, Japan, Canada, and it's specifically aimed at securing diverse, resilient, and transparent supply chains among trusted democratic partners.
So pooling resources.
Exactly. The goal is to pool resources, co-invest in environmentally compliant processing facilities outside of China, and diversify sources of critical minerals to collectively reduce the risk. This is a clear demonstration of advanced energy diplomacy. It's recognizing that security now rests on specialized minerals, not just barrels of crude oil.
And the second pillar is robust domestic action, designed to increase self-sufficiency.
That is the critical minerals mission. This involves serious, robust domestic initiatives aimed at accelerating exploration, extraction, processing, and establishing national self-sufficiency across the entire value chain.
So not just finding them, but controlling the whole process.
The long-term goal is not just to find minerals, but to transition from relying on foreign processing to building indigenous capacity in specialized refining and manufacturing. That's how you insulate your growing economy and defense sector from external geopolitical shocks. The source frames this as an urgent national priority, tied directly to India's long-term economic and strategic goals, like the Make in India initiative.
And for our listener, this connects to two crucial areas of study.
Absolutely. First, for GS1, the distribution of key natural resources. You need to understand where these resources are concentrated geologically and the resulting economic and political impact of that concentration. The resource map is literally changing the global power map.
And for international relations.
For GS2, international relations and energy diplomacy, this must be framed as a central component of any country's contemporary foreign policy and energy security strategy. It shows a necessary evolution beyond traditional oil and gas diplomacy towards securing the inputs for future technology. The geopolitical risk has, in a way, migrated from the Strait of Hormuz to the processing plants that refine battery components.
That is a fundamental transition in global risk factors. Wow.
Yeah.
We're now going to shift gears entirely. We're moving from the global competition for resources to a hyper-local environmental conflict that demonstrates the vulnerability of unchecked urbanization. This brings us to our final and most urgent hook, Gair Mumkin Pahar. So now we're focusing on the Aravali. This is one of the most vital ecological systems in the Indian subcontinent, specifically serving the massive National Capital Region, or NCR. It's crucial to remember the geological context here. The Aravali are an ancient backbone, one of the world's oldest fold mountains. They predate the Himalayas by millions of years.
Their geological age, often quoted at around 1.5 billion years, is essential context. I mean, they're a monument to deep time. But the core problem highlighted in the source involves a modern, very dangerous redefinition of what legally constitutes an Aravali hill, a definition that carries immediate and devastating environmental consequences for millions of people.
And that memory hook, Gair Mumkin Pahar, it perfectly captures the bureaucratic attitude at play, doesn't it? It literally translates to impossible or uncultivable hill.
Right.
A phrase that just reflects an administrative shift in recognizing these features. It's essentially denying their ecological reality for the sake of development.
That phrasing, it reveals the administrative mindset at its most reductive. It's bureaucracy attempting to redefine nature itself for convenience, often to enable commercial activity. Let's dive deep into the specific mechanism, the impact of this new 100-meter definition.
Okay, so the issue is a new, highly restrictive administrative definition. It states that only hills measuring greater than 100 meters high are legally recognized and, crucially, subject to environmental protection as officially defined Aravalis.
And this is a textbook example of how a simple administrative metric can trigger massive ecological destruction. The sources detail the shocking consequence of this change. 90% of the hills, specifically the lower, gentler, and longer foothills, immediately lose their forest protection status under the law.
90%. That just sounds less like a policy refinement and more like a mass deregulation event designed to clear the path for developers.
It's hard to see it any other way.
What criteria were being used previously that recognized the true ecological extent of the range?
Well, the comparison is just stark. The earlier scientifically sound criteria were much more robust. They encompass geological features defined by factors like slope gradient combined with a minimum height of just 30 meters.
Okay, so much more inclusive.
Much more. This earlier approach acknowledged the vast, sprawling, interconnected nature of the range and would have covered perhaps 40% of the total area, which is still far more ecologically sensible than this new arbitrary limit. The new 100-meter restriction essentially discards the bulk of the foothills, which are, ironically, the very parts that perform the most vital environmental functions.
And the consequence of removing this protection is, well, it's immediate and purely economic.
Absolutely. Once the land is administratively deemed non-forest or non-hill, it is thrown open for rapid exploitation. We are talking about potential large-scale mining, illegal quarrying, and massive real estate development in a region that is starving for land and construction materials.
The incentive is massive.
The economic incentive for short-term developers, especially real estate speculators, is enormous. And this administrative loophole provides a seemingly legal path to capitalize on land that was previously protected. It's a short-term economic win predicated on a catastrophic long-term ecological loss.
This action, it immediately raises a high-stakes constitutional question, doesn't it? About environmental governance and the rights of citizens.
It raises a very important question that cuts to the core of environmental jurisprudence. Can a purely administrative definition, an arbitrary height metric, override the fundamental demonstrated ecological role of a geological formation? Environmental law mandates adherence to the precautionary principle.
Which is the idea that you have to act to prevent harm before irreversible damage occurs.
Exactly. By administratively reclassifying 90% of these hills out of existence, you nullify the very need for prior environmental clearance. It's a legal sleight of hand.
And the legal precedents in India, specifically concerning the fundamental right to life under Article 21, have often been interpreted to include the right to a clean, safe environment. This change seems to actively subvert that right.
It does. The Supreme Court has repeatedly stressed that environmental harm is often irreversible. So retrospective changes or permissions that weaken environmental duties, they erode the constitutional protection that's afforded to citizens. And the fact that this policy is happening in the NCR, a region already choked by toxic smog and pollution, makes the administrative negligence here particularly alarming. The government is removing a vital natural filter at the very moment it is needed most.
The immediate economic consequence is clear, but the deeper strategic function of the Aravalis, which is now compromised. That's truly terrifying. We have to emphasize the Aravalis' primary environmental function, acting as the natural barrier to the Thar Desert.
This is the high-stakes implication that every citizen of Delhi and the NCR must understand. The Aravalis are not just a green space. They are the critical climatic buffer for the entire region. Think of the range as a massive, millennia-old perimeter wall of a fortress.
And what part of that wall is now being dismantled by this 100-meter rule?
It's the lower sprawling foothills, those very 10 to 30-meter high sections that are now unprotected. These lower hills act as absolutely vital windbreaks and dust traps. They dissipate the force of the winds and stabilize the soil, preventing sand and dust from the vast, active Thar Desert from migrating eastward towards the densely populated cities of Delhi, Haryana, and Uttar Pradesh.
So they slow the wind, they stabilize the microclimate.
They do everything to maintain that fragile ecological balance.
So if that perimeter fence vanishes due to mining and construction, the consequences aren't just incremental, they're catastrophic.
That is the fear embedded in the source analysis. The removal of this barrier allows the desert to literally march eastward. If these lower hills vanish due to mining or construction, the phrase used in the analysis becomes frighteningly real. If they vanish, Delhi becomes vulnerable to desertification.
You're not talking about just more dust in the air.
No, we are talking about an increased frequency and intensity of dust storms, massive soil degradation, water scarcity crises as groundwater tables are depleted faster, and a fundamental destabilization of the regional climate.
It makes you realize how delicate the ecological balance of a major city is, and how easily bureaucracy, focused on simplifying land records or enabling short-term economic gains, can just unravel millennia of geological defense.
The implication is irreversible damage and potentially existential climate insecurity for one of the world's largest urban agglomerations. The destruction of these lower hills due to administrative convenience fundamentally undermines the entire region's climate resilience and exposes millions to extreme desert conditions. It's a classic conflict between the short-term profit motive and long-term planetary security.
And this issue, it serves as a perfect case study for any high-level policy and governance discussion.
The main link is to the mains examination theme, urbanization versus environment. This is a crucial, contemporary case study illustrating the deep, often violent conflict between short-term urban and economic interests like massive real estate development, quarrying, mining, and the necessary long-term environmental and climate security for a major population center. It forces the question of intergenerational equity. Does our generation have the right to destroy the ecological inheritance that protects millions from the expansion of the desert? Redefining a critical ecological asset to facilitate its destruction directly violates this principle.
The interconnectedness of these three issues is it's absolutely stark. We started with digital exclusion, moved to global mineral dependency, and ended with ecological vulnerability, all orbiting this central idea of scarce, contested, or threatened resources. We've concluded a crucial deep dive today. We mapped the structural barriers of the new inequality stemming from skewed, meaningful access to the high-quality tools required for modern life. We identified the supply chain fragility of the new oil, highlighting the alarming geopolitical risks in concentrated mineral processing. And finally, we saw how a simple, restrictive 100-meter administrative rule could legally turn the foundational landscape of the NCR into Gair Mumkin Pahar, exposed to the inexorable march of the Thar Desert.
The unifying thread across this entire deep dive is undeniably vulnerability and control. Whether it's social vulnerability to technological change that locks people out from digital participation, or economic vulnerability to geopolitical control over the minerals that underpin our energy future, or ecological vulnerability to unchecked development that threatens to destabilize the climate of an entire capital region. True national and societal resilience requires addressing all three domains simultaneously because a failure in one area rapidly precipitates a crisis in the others.
It seems that the biggest risks today aren't always traditional military threats, are they? They're structural, systemic frailties hidden beneath seemingly benign statistics or convenient administrative definitions.
That is the modern reality of governance and risk. The sources force us to think critically about resource distribution in every sense of the word. They show that simply having technology or minerals or a mountain range is not enough. The quality of access, the control over the supply chain, and the legal definition of protection, that is what truly determines the trajectory of the future. The fight is over the fine print.
And the dialogue around the digital divide makes it so clear that the focus has to shift from mere penetration stats to ensuring genuine, meaningful access to high-quality tools for everyone, especially in education and health.
And the ecological struggle in the Aravali highlights that we just cannot allow administrative convenience to override foundational environmental duties owed to future generations. These are the deep interconnected challenges that define modern geopolitics and social governments.
So for our final provocative thought for you to consider as you process this deep dive, in an era where information through digital access, energy through critical minerals, and survival through ecological barriers are all defined by scarce, often monopolized resources, does security today depend less on traditional military strength and more on radical global and domestic equity? If a society is fundamentally unequal in these three critical areas, can it ever be truly secure? And what steps outside of immediate government policy, what can citizens and civil society do to push for the equitable distribution and protection of these three critical yet currently vulnerable resources?
The answers will define the century. Thank you for joining us for this crucial deep dive into the new battlegrounds of inequality, resource control, and climate resilience. We hope these memory hooks stick with you.
Until next time.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Look, for most of us, navigating the world of economic data, all the acronyms, the policy debates, the jargon, it can feel less like discovery and more like hacking your way through a dense, dark forest.
It really can. It's so easy to get lost.
Exactly. And the stakes are so high, right? This stuff determines everything from your home loan rate all the way up to national growth.
That's absolutely right. And our mission today is to provide you with a high-leverage toolkit. We're taking a stack of source materials covering everything from central banking protocols to, grassroots development finance, and we are going to connect the dots.
Okay.
We want to show you the fundamental architecture, how central banks control the money supply, how governments raise and spend massive funds for development, and maybe most importantly, how accountability and grassroots inclusion are woven into that economic fabric.
We're looking for those aha moments, the things that turn these really abstract concepts into something you can intuitively understand. This dive is designed to be your shortcut, really, to being genuinely well-informed, moving beyond the headlines to the mechanisms that actually drive the economy.
And we're focusing squarely on the high-leverage concepts in finance and governance, the ones that really determine stability and long-term growth. So it makes sense to start at the foundation with the guardians of the entire financial system.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's begin with the Reserve Bank of India, the central bank. We often focus only on their role in setting short-term interest rates, like the repo rate.
The thing everyone talks about.
Right. But our sources confirm that the RBI's scope is dramatically wider. It acts as the ultimate supervisor and really the systemic guardian of every single commercial bank operating in the country.
That's the key. The RBI's mandate is not just monetary policy, it's supervisory policy. It's all about ensuring that commercial banks don't become excessively risky.
Keeping the system stable.
Exactly. Keeping the system robust. And our sources highlight four specific and really indispensable pillars of regulation that define that relationship between the RBI and the commercial banks.
So what are those four pillars? And I guess what kind of systemic failures are they designed to prevent?
Well, the first, and you could argue it's the most crucial for stability, is regulating the liquidity of assets.
Liquidity of assets.
Yes. This mandate ensures that commercial banks hold sufficient amounts of highly liquid assets, things like cash, government securities, so they can meet any sudden demands from their depositors.
So in simple terms, it's like the financial equivalent of mandatory life vests on a ship.
That's a perfect analogy. Yeah. Exactly. If a bank doesn't have enough liquidity, even a hint of bad news can trigger a bank run.
Right.
And that leads to immediate insolvency and, systemic panic. We saw that globally in 2008.
Right.
So by strictly controlling asset liquidity, the RBI prevents that kind of fragility from ever taking hold.
Okay, so that handles stability and solvency within the banks that already exist. But what about the structure itself? I'm thinking about things like their reach, their scale.
And that brings us to the second and third functions. The RBI regulates branch expansion.
Branch expansion. Now that sounds almost administrative.
It might seem that way, but it's an incredibly powerful policy tool. The central bank uses this power to ensure a balanced geographical distribution of banking services.
Oh, I see.
They can incentivize or even mandate banks to open branches in rural and previously underserved areas. It's a way to push forward the financial inclusion agenda, rather than just letting all the capital and banking services concentrate in the most profitable metro areas.
So it's using a regulatory power to achieve a much broader national policy goal. Very interesting. And the third function?
The third is the regulation, the merger of banks. Whenever two banks decide to combine, the RBI scrutinizes that process very, very intensely.
Why is that?
This is structural regulation. They need to ensure the resulting entity is not just well capitalized, but also that it manages risk appropriately. They want to prevent mergers that could create entities that are, too big to fail.
Right. The kind of entity that could pose an unmanageable threat to the whole economic system if something went wrong.
Precisely. And that leads logically to the final point, because failure is sometimes inevitable in a market economy. You have to be able to manage the exit gracefully. Yes, the fourth area is the winding up of banks. If a bank does fail, the RBI manages the whole process to protect depositors up to the insured limit, of course, and ensures the collapse is contained and orderly.
The goal is to prevent what's called contagion, right?
Exactly, preventing that domino effect where one bank's failure causes a cascade of failures throughout the financial system. So these four functions, liquidity, expansion, mergers, and winding up, they really give the RBI complete life cycle control over the commercial banking sector.
Okay, now let's pivot to the most famous tool in that central banking toolkit, the bank rate. Our sources ask a specific question. What does a rise in the bank rate signify? What's the explicit policy intention behind that move?
A rise in the bank rate generally indicates that the central bank is following a tight money policy. This is a powerful, very clear signal to the entire economy.
And just to clarify for everyone, the bank rate is the rate at which the RBI provides long-term credit to commercial banks.
That's right. So it effectively sets a foundation for the cost of capital in the economy.
So if the long-term cost of borrowing money for a commercial bank goes up, I imagine the entire supply chain of credit just becomes more expensive.
Absolutely. The commercial bank's cost of funds instantly increases. They, in turn, pass that higher cost onto their customers. We're talking businesses, home buyers, consumers, in the form of higher interest rates for everything.
Everything from working capital loans to mortgages and auto loans.
A whole spectrum.
I get the immediate impact on my wallet, but what is the RBI's macroeconomic goal here? What are they actually targeting with this move?
They are signaling a desire to curb inflation and to slow down credit growth. By making borrowing more expensive, they dampen what's called aggregate demand.
So people and companies just spend less.
That's the idea. Consumers might delay major purchases like a new home or a car. Businesses might put off expansion plans that require loans.
And this reduction in spending pressure is designed to pull inflation back down.
Exactly. Inflation is, at its core, too much money chasing too few goods. This is the central bank using the cost of money to engineer a deliberate, measured slowdown to fight those rising prices.
Okay, moving from the internal plumbing of banking to the nation's external financial strength. Let's talk about India's foreign exchange reserves. We always hear this huge number, but what specific items actually make up this pool of wealth? What is this national safety net?
Our sources detail three main components. The largest and the most frequently traded element is what's called foreign currency assets. These are holdings in foreign currencies, typically US dollars, euros, or yen, and they're often held in highly liquid instruments like foreign government bonds. These are absolutely essential for international trade and for managing the balance of payments.
And the second component is the timeless store of value.
That's right. The second component is the gold holdings of the RBI. Gold acts as this crucial hedge against currency volatility and inflation. It provides stability and credibility, especially during times of global financial crisis.
And then there's the third component, which I think is often the most confusing one for the layperson, SDRs.
That would be the social drawing rights, or SDRs.
Yes.
Yes. These are an international reserve asset, and they were created by the IMF.
But they're not a currency themselves, right?
No, they're not. It's better to think of them as a potential claim on the freely usable currencies of IMF member countries. They act as a supplementary international reserve.
So like another layer of global liquidity.
A layer of global liquidity that's be mobilized in times of severe global financial stress. During the COVID crisis, for example, the IMF distributed SDRs to help member countries manage their liquidity crunch. They're essentially a global financial insurance policy.
And it's absolutely vital to note what our sources explicitly exclude from this list. Foreign exchange reserves do not include loans taken from the World Bank or from other foreign countries.
That is a fundamental accounting truth that determines national financial health. It's so important. Reserves are assets, money the nation owns and holds to manage its external stability.
Whereas loans are liabilities.
Exactly. Loans, regardless of the source, are liabilities, money the nation owes. Confusing the two would grossly misrepresent the country's actual financial capacity and strength. Reserves provide the ability to stabilize the rupee. Loans just increase the debt burden.
Let's connect this back to inflation. We talked about the RBI's role in using the bank rate to curb it, but what are the fundamental drivers of a rise in general price levels? Our sources list 3 primary causes.
The underlying tension causing inflation is always this imbalance between demand and supply. The 3 drivers are, first, an increase in the money supply. This is the classic monetary driver, often resulting from, say, aggressive central bank stimulus or government financing mechanisms that create new liquidity.
Right, that's pure demand pull, just fueled by easily accessible cash.
Precisely. The second driver is a decrease in the aggregate level of output. This is the cost push driver.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Imagine a major supply chain disruption, like a global chip shortage or a widespread drought that affects agriculture. The economy is literally producing less, so scarcity drives up the price of the goods that are available, even if the amount of money in the system hasn't changed.
And the third factor addresses consumer behavior and confidence.
That's an increase in the effective demand. This happens when consumers and businesses feel really confident about the future, maybe because of rising wages or tax cuts. They suddenly increase their purchasing power and their willingness to spend. And that pushes demand beyond the economy's immediate ability to produce.
And most real-world inflation events are a complex mix of all 3 of these interacting.
Almost always, yes.
Okay, focusing specifically on government actions for a moment. Let's talk about the use of deficit financing, where the government spends more than it collects in revenue. Our sources cite this as the most inflationary of standard government practices. Why is funding a deficit inherently more inflationary than, say, raising taxes to pay for something?
Well, the term deficit financing covers a few different methods. The practice that's cited as most inflationary is when the government funds that deficit through monetization.
Monetization?
It means the government effectively asks the central bank to purchase its bonds, which often amounts to creating new money, or money equivalents that just did not exist before.
So if the government borrows from the public by issuing bonds, that's just moving money that's already in the economic pot from one person to another. But monetization, it sounds like adding water to the pot from an external tap.
That's a perfect metaphor. Borrowing from the public just redistributes existing liquidity. Monetization, or as it's sometimes called, printing new money, is pure demand stimulation.
And when the government immediately spends this new money...
When it spends it on projects, it injects liquidity into the system without any simultaneous increase in available goods or services in the short term. And that leads rapidly to inflation, that classic too much money scenario.
On a separate but related note regarding investor sentiment, we often hear news reports of the Sensex and Nifty indices touching record highs. Our sources, however, add a crucial piece of context that really challenges the idea that this means broad-based economic health.
Yes, the headline figures are exciting, but the movement is primarily driven by a narrow set of large-cap heavyweights.
Just the biggest, most established companies, the giants.
The market giants, exactly.
Why should the listener care if the rally is narrow? I mean, as long as the market is going up, isn't that a good thing?
Not necessarily. Not for stability and long-term depth. This narrowness signals what we call concentration risk. If a disproportionately small number of stocks are responsible for all the index gains, it means the rally is shallow. It's fragile. If 1 or 2 of those heavyweights face a sudden regulatory challenge or a cyclical downturn, the entire index is exposed to a rapid, sharp correction.
And crucially, it also indicates that smaller and medium enterprises, the SMEs, they might not be participating.
And they are the engines of job creation and broad-based growth. So if they're left out, it's not a healthy sign. A healthy rally is one driven by momentum across the entire spectrum, not just concentrated performance among a few titans.
When we assess a nation's financial system, we also have to see how the world assesses it. That means looking at the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and its classification of exchange rate regimes. Why is the IMF classification based on actual behavior and not just what a country officially claims its currency regime is?
The IMF classification is absolutely fundamental because it underpins the entire global surveillance framework under what's known as Article 4.
So it's about transparency.
It's all about transparency and honest policy assessment. If a country claims to have a purely floating rate, but is constantly intervening in the market to keep the rate stable, The IMF has to classify it based on that intervention, the behavior, not the claim. It prevents countries from, hiding unsustainable currency policies. It's the internationally accepted report card on currency management.
What does this spectrum of classification look like for the rupee? Our sources seem to imply a complex middle ground, noting things like crawling peg type features.
Well, the spectrum ranges from hard fixed pegs, like a currency board, all the way to independently floating. India has traditionally sat somewhere in the middle, a managed float.
And a crawling peg, what's that specifically?
A crawling peg is a specific arrangement where the central rate is adjusted periodically in small, pre-announced steps. This adjustment is usually designed to offset inflation differentials. So if your domestic inflation is higher than your trading partners, you gradually devalue the currency to maintain competitiveness.
It's like walking up an escalator rather than running up a staircase. The movement is happening, but the pace is controlled and predictable.
That's a great way to put it. And that predictability allows businesses to plan without the shock of sudden sharp currency movements. But a key insight here, and this links back to our earlier discussion, is that adopting a strict peg, or even crawling peg features, still constrains your domestic monetary policy.
You give up some independence.
You give up some independence in setting your own interest rates because the rate decision has to be consistent with that managed exchange rate path. Our sources clarify that while the IMF now generally classifies India as a managed float with no predetermined path, the RBI's intervention patterns still show those stabilizing, gradual adjustment features that are typical of a crawling peg.
And this classification dictates how foreign investors view the rupee's stability, how the IMF monitors the economy, and ultimately it affects the cost and the ease of attracting global capital.
It's a huge factor.
We've established the strict controls the RBI places on the internal system and the importance of global perception. But stability is worthless without action. We need to shift gears now to the government's operational role. How does it acquire the massive resources needed to fund national aspirations? This is really the necessary counterweight to central bank oversight.
Yes, and the government employs various fiscal tools, but one of the key mechanisms we just touched on is deficit financing spending more than you earn. In India, historically, the primary explicitly stated purpose of deficit financing is raising resources for economic development.
And it's crucial that we underline that application. The government is intentionally using a tool that's potentially inflationary, which we know can create new money, not for short-term fixes like reducing debt or balancing trade, but for long-term productive investments.
That strategic intent is absolutely everything. They're financing capital expenditure, infrastructure, education, research investments designed to generate a future rate of return that should, in theory, outgrow the incurred debt and the inflationary effects.
It's a calculated bet on future productivity.
A very calculated bet, yes.
Now, moving from money to people, India has one of its greatest assets in its population structure, the demographic dividend. This means a high proportion of young people in the working age bracket. But, as we all know, a dividend is only realized if those people are productive. What is the single core action that India must prioritize to fully harvest the benefits of this demographic structure?
The sources are unanimous on this. The core action is promoting skill development.
The clock is ticking.
The demographic dividend is a ticking clock. If you have a young, massive workforce that lacks the necessary skills, whether it's digital literacy, vocational trades, or specialized technical expertise, that dividend can very quickly become a massive burden. It can lead to widespread underemployment or what's known as jobless growth.
So skill development is the critical bridge that links the sheer number of people to real economic potential.
Exactly. It ensures that the economy can actually absorb this labor pool into high-value, high-productivity sectors. It's about moving individuals from low-productivity work, sometimes even disguised unemployment in the informal sector, into roles that maximize the nation's output and create genuinely inclusive, sustainable growth.
So promoting skill development is arguably the highest leverage investment the country can make right now.
Without a doubt.
Well,
through initiatives that enhance digital, financial, and vocational literacy.
now, whenever immense sums of public money are involved, accountability has to be airtight. This brings us to the core legislative watchdog structure, the Parliamentary Committee on Public Accounts, or the PAPC. How is this critical oversight body structured?
The PAPC's entire purpose is to ensure that the executive government is accountable to the legislature for its spending. According to our source material, the committee consists of not more than 25 members of the Lok Sabha. It's a legislative body that investigates whether public funds were spent legally, efficiently, and for the purpose for which Parliament intended them.
Okay, that's the composition. What are the two primary functions that give the PIAC its real investigative power, its teeth?
The first function is the detailed scrutiny of the appropriation and finance accounts of the government. Appropriation accounts show how the money was actually spent versus what Parliament sanctioned for spending.
And the finance accounts?
Finance accounts review the overall financial health. The PACE doesn't just skim the surface, they dig deep into the details to ensure every single rupee was spent legally.
So that's the forensic accounting part. And the second, equally crucial function relies on an external expert.
Correct. The second function is to examine the report of the Controller and Auditor General of India, the CAG. The CAG is the supreme external auditor, constitutionally mandated to audit all expenditure from the Consolidated Fund, the Contingency Fund, and the public account of both India and the states.
So let me see if I have this right. The CAG acts as the external financial referee. They conduct the audit, and then the PAG acts as the legislative jury, forcing the executive government to explain any misuse, extravagance, or failure that was identified in the CAG's report.
That's the layered accountability at work. It's a perfect description. The CAG provides the detailed, nonpartisan expert analysis. The PAG then uses that analysis to hold the ministers and the relevant departments to account publicly in Parliament.
And this structured oversight is pivotal for financial probity.
Absolutely. And it's why the CAG is often referred to as the guide, friend, and philosopher to these legislative committees. It provides the necessary wisdom and expertise for them to do their job of legislative scrutiny effectively.
Let's move down to the ground level now. We've discussed the national financial architecture, but how does that centralized control ensure that credit actually reaches small-scale farmers, microenterprises, and the most vulnerable people, instead of just being funneled into large corporations?
The primary systemic tool for that kind of inclusion is priority sector lending, or PSL.
PSL?
Yes, this is a regulatory mandate, and it's enforced by the RBI. It requires commercial banks to dedicate a stipulated percentage of their adjusted net bank credit to specific sectors that are deemed vital for social equity and broad national development.
So this isn't voluntary, it's mandated inclusion. What sectors fall under this umbrella? Is it narrowly focused, or does it cover the whole breadth of grassroots needs?
It is intentionally broad, and this confirms the scope that's identified in the sources. PSL constitutes lending to all of the above options provided in the source material: agriculture, micro and small enterprises, and weaker sections.
I see.
This mechanism forces the financial system to strategically reallocate capital. It mitigates that inherent market failure where commercial banks might otherwise see these sectors as too risky or too low return. PSL ensures vital resources support food security, small business employment, and social upliftment.
So PSL provides the systemic mandate. Now, let's look at a mission that really embodies grassroots financial empowerment through community: the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, or NRLM. This goes beyond just credit distribution, right? It's more of an organizational innovation, and it's primarily focused on empowering women.
The NRLM has become a global benchmark for poverty reduction. Its objective is to build sustainable community institutions that enable poor rural households, especially women, to access gainful self-employment and skilled wage opportunities. It's built entirely on the concept of self-help groups, or SHGs.
Can you tell us about the scale and the financial discipline that makes this NRLM model so effective?
The scale is just immense. We're talking about organizing over 10.05 crore rural women into more than 90 lakh SHGs.
Wow.
And these groups, based on peer pressure and shared accountability, have accessed over 11 lakh crore in collateral-free credit.
That is a colossal amount of credit, and you said it's collateral-free. The risk should be astronomical, yet the source data shows the repayment rate is nearly perfect. How on earth does the SHG structure achieve this financial miracle?
The high repayment rate, which stands at an incredible 98%, is the genius of the organizational innovation itself. Traditional banks often fail rural customers because of a lack of collateral and high administrative costs.
Right.
The SHG model minimizes this risk through three mechanisms. First, peer selection. The members know who in their community is reliable. Second, shared accountability. If one member defaults, the whole group suffers, so they self-monitor very closely.
And the third?
And third, small, iterative lending. They start with tiny microloans and only increase the amounts as discipline is proven over time. This community-based model drastically lowers the transactional risk, and more importantly, it validates the creditworthiness of the poor.
Before we leave grassroots development, we should also acknowledge the Integrated Child Development Services, or ICDS. While it's maybe less focused on direct credit, it's such a critical foundational investment.
ICDS is monumental. It was launched way back in 1975. It is India's largest early childhood care and nutrition program.
And it operates through the Anganwadi centers.
Nearly 14 lakh of them. And it provides this crucial package of health checkups, supplementary nutrition, and preschool education to children from 0 to 6 years old, as well as pregnant women and lactating mothers. It acts as the foundational safety net against malnutrition, mortality, and developmental gaps. It ensures the next generation is healthy enough to realize that demographic dividend we were just talking about.
Okay, we've spanned central banking, government finance, and grassroots inclusion. Now let's zoom in on 3 high-impact sectors, starting with how industry manages resources and waste in the pursuit of sustainability.
Yes, the goal of modern industry isn't just production anymore, it's circularity. And the sugar industry provides a perfect case study for this. It's a key source of consumer goods, of course, but its economics viability often hinges on the efficient use of its byproducts.
We know the process of making sugar generates a lot of residue. Our sources prompt us to consider the usefulness of these byproducts. What are the key examples, and how do they contribute to the sector's bottom line?
The key byproducts are bagasse, molasses, and pressed mud. Bagasse, which is the fibrous cane residue, is critically useful because it's primarily used as a biofuel.
Biofuel.
Yes. Sugar mills burn it to generate the heat and steam they need to run their own operations. They often generate surplus electricity, which they can then sell back to the grid. This makes sugar mills highly energy independent, and it significantly lowers their operating costs.
That's a massive efficiency gain right there. What about molasses?
Molasses, the sticky syrup that's left over, is a crucial feedstock for the entire ethanol and alcohol industry. With the national push for ethanol blending in fuels, molasses has become a highly valuable commodity, adding immense value that goes way beyond just the production of sugar crystals.
And the last one, pressed mud.
Right. Pressed mud, which is the filtration waste, is recycled as a valuable soil conditioner and fertilizer. So full utilization minimizes waste disposal challenges, and it maximizes that whole circular economy concept.
Now let's talk about a resource use statistic that is far less sustainable. We're looking at identifying the maximum consumer of water among specified heavy industries in India. Which sector takes the top spot?
The maximum consumer of water among the specified industries, and the list includes engineering, paper and pulp, textiles, and thermal power, is overwhelmingly thermal power.
That's a shocking revelation for many, I think. Why is thermal power so astonishingly water-intensive? We tend to associate the environmental cost of coal with carbon emissions, not so much with water usage.
Thermal power generation, especially from older coal-fired plants, relies on water for massive-scale cooling. Water is required to condense enormous volumes of steam back into liquid water so it can be reused in the boiler system. This continuous cooling demand requires colossal volumes of water.
And that water is either consumed or returned to water bodies at a much higher temperature. So every single gigawatt of power produced requires a vast, continuous withdrawal from rivers or reservoirs.
Absolutely. And this dependence creates intense resource conflict, especially in water-scarce regions or during drought periods. It actually places the entire energy grid at risk of water shortages. It just underscores the severe environmental cost associated with India's legacy energy infrastructure.
Which makes the push toward renewable, less water-intensive alternatives like solar and wind a matter of resource security, not just climate policy.
It's a security issue, that's right.
Staying in the resources space, let's look at innovation in food security, starting with a powerful public health intervention, fortified rice kernels, or FRK. What exactly is this, and what public health crisis is it designed to solve?
FRK is a technological solution designed to combat widespread micronutrient deficiencies. We're talking particularly about iron deficiency, anemia, and malnutrition, which affect huge swaths of the population.
And what is it, physically?
It is essentially rice flour that's been blended with essential micronutrients, crucially iron, folic acid, and vitamin B12. And that mixture is then extruded through machinery to perfectly resemble natural rice grains.
So it's not genetic modification, it's physical manufacturing to add nutrients.
Correct. It looks, cooks, and tastes just like normal rice. And it's mixed with regular rice at a mandatory ratio, typically 1 to 100.
1 part FRK per 100 parts of normal rice.
Yes, and that low ratio ensures that the vital micronutrients are evenly distributed throughout the final staple product that people consume. It efficiently solves the problem of dietary gaps. And the government's facilitation of FRK export just demonstrates its confidence in its domestic fortification standards and its ability to adhere to international food safety norms.
That's optimizing a traditional product. Now let's jump to the really radical end of innovation. Lab-grown milk or animal-free dairy. This isn't vegan oat milk. This is molecularly identical dairy made without a cow.
This is a profound leap. It utilizes industrial biotechnology, a process often called precision fermentation. And the resulting product is real milk because it contains the exact same dairy proteins, casein and whey, that are found in cow's milk. But the production process completely bypasses the animal.
How do scientists manufacture milk proteins without a mammary gland? I mean, it sounds like science fiction.
It's a surprisingly elegant process. Researchers take the specific milk-producing genes and they insert them into common, safe microbes, often yeast. This turns the yeast cells into tiny protein factories.
Okay.
These engineered microbes are placed in bioreactors, basically large fermentation tanks, and are fed sugar, which acts as their energy source. The microbes then secrete the target dairy proteins, the casein and whey. These pure proteins are then harvested and blended with plant-based fats, carbohydrates, and minerals to perfectly reconstitute milk.
What are the resulting features and the immediate implications of this?
The features are striking. Nutritionally, it's identical to traditional milk. It delivers all 9 essential amino acids. However, it offers customization. It's inherently lactose-free, cholesterol-free, and hormone-free.
But the biggest implication has to be environmental.
Oh, by far. Precision fermentation requires drastically less land, less water, and critically, it eliminates the massive methane emissions associated with conventional cattle farming. It offers a genuinely climate-friendly, sustainable pathway for the future of dairy consumption, freeing up vast amounts of land and water resources.
We've seen high-tech manufacturing. Let's look at organizational structure. Sometimes the most successful economic models are based on community and cooperation, a concept brilliantly embodied by the Gujarat Cooperative Milk Marketing Federation, which operates under the famous brand Amul.
Amul is an economic and social phenomena. It's built on that cooperative spirit. And our sources highlight its global significance. It was ranked #1 in the world in the ICA World Cooperative Monitor 2025 based on its performance relative to the GDP per capita of its operating country.
That metric is fascinating. Why GDP per capita performance rather than just raw revenue?
Focusing on GDP per capita performance really emphasizes the social impact. It measures the extent to which the cooperative successfully enhances the livelihoods of its members, the farmers, relative to the average wealth of the nation. This ranking confirms Amul's massive socioeconomic power. It demonstrates how a decentralized, farmer-owned model can achieve global scale, enhance local prosperity, and maintain remarkable financial stability.
That organizational strength is key. Let's look at a new initiative designed to leverage government procurement power to support local enterprise. The Abhar Online Store Initiative. What is this mechanism and what is its dual goal?
The Abhar Online Store is a focused effort to promote indigenous and heritage-based products. The core mechanism is strategic procurement. The Indian Railways, a colossal government entity, uses this online store to procure high-quality gift articles, souvenirs, and hampers for its official use.
So who is the direct beneficiary of this guaranteed government demand?
They procure from established nodes of traditional industry, places like the Central Cottage Industries Emporium, the Khadi and Village Industries Commission, or KVIC, and various recognized state handloom and handicraft emporiums. The government, by acting as a major, reliable, and high-volume buyer, provides crucial market stability and access.
This sounds like a powerful way to reinforce the Vocal for Local campaign with concrete economic action.
Exactly. The dual goal is, first, to provide reliable market access to marginalized artisans, rural entrepreneurs, and women-led enterprises, which fosters direct social inclusion. And second, it sustains traditional industries, ensuring that heritage crafts, handlooms, handicrafts, remain economically viable by linking them directly to institutional demand. It's using government buying power to drive inclusive growth.
We've completed an expansive deep dive today. We moved from the high-altitude view of the financial system, the strict rules the RBI imposes on bank liquidity and mergers, down to the street level, seeing the power of priority sector lending and the organizational genius of the NRLM, which achieves an astonishing 98% repayment rate on collateral-free loans.
We connected financial management to accountability through the PACE, ensuring the executive is held to account by the legislative arm based on the KEG's reports. And finally, we juxtaposed the resource demands of our legacy infrastructure, noting thermal power's immense water consumption with the radical, climate-friendly possibilities of tomorrow. such as animal-free dairy produced through precision fermentation and the public health success of fortified rice kernels.
The stability of the entire financial system, which is anchored by the RBI's robust oversight, is fundamentally reliant on two things: the successful strategic mobilization of resources through tools like deficit financing, and the equitable distribution of that capital, which is brilliantly demonstrated by the high success rates in these grassroots missions.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the pursuit of economic development requires a delicate, high-wire balancing act between legacy infrastructure and futuristic needs. We have established systemic mechanisms like PSL, ICDS, and the Abhar store that are designed to correct market failures and guide capital to where it is most needed and most productive. Yet, we face hard resource limits, vividly seen in the massive water demand of our energy sector.
So what does this all mean for the future?
The central challenge is not merely funding growth, but regulating innovation at the speed which it appears. We have established regulatory bodies for banking and for traditional food production. But as technologies like precision fermentation emerge, promising sustainable alternatives to legacy infrastructure, policy has to adapt and adapt rapidly. The final question for you to mull over is this. As new food and materials derived from microbial precision fermentation enter the global supply chain, what entirely new international or domestic regulatory body will we need, and how will it function to ensure both safety standards and equitable global trade for these radically new products in the next decade?
Okay, let's unpack this. We have a dense, truly fascinating stack of sources today.
We really do.
They span continents, disciplines. I mean, we're moving from the microscopic world of advanced fermentation all the way to the cosmic realm of, planetary naming conventions.
But there's a thread connecting them all, isn't there?
There always is. And as we often find on the show, it's this crucial, central theme of managing vulnerability and building resilience.
That's absolutely the core mission of this deep dive.
Yeah.
The material you've shared, it forces us to look at how we manage global vulnerability.
On every level.
Exactly. Whether it's the ecological fragility we see from illegal wildlife trafficking or, the massive societal risk from climate adaptation funding shortfalls.
Or even securing our own infrastructure against future threats using things like quantum communication.
Precisely. So we're going to synthesize these complex technical details into clear, actionable knowledge. We'll cover three main and, I think, interconnected domains. First, endangered species and how conservation policy itself is evolving. Then, the global state of climate finance and these resilience gaps. And finally, some major breakthroughs in Indian science and technology that are really redefining security and sustainability.
Let's do it. We'll start right at the biological level with a creature that has earned this amazing moniker, the Einstein of the bird world.
The African gray parrot.
Psittacus erythicus. When you look at the sources, what makes this bird so special? And I guess, why does that special quality also make it so vulnerable?
It's a classic bittersweet irony, really. The African gray parrot is, a medium-sized bird, but its cognitive intelligence is just exceptional.
Off the chart.
It puts them right alongside dolphins and primates in certain metrics. They're famous for being the absolute best mimic among all bird species.
But it's more than just mimicry, isn't it? I remember the research with Alex the parrot. It wasn't just repeating words.
Not at all. That's the key. They often seem to understand context. Researchers have documented their ability to perform really complex tasks. Numerical reasoning, associating shapes with specific colors, specific materials. They genuinely process and understand language conceptually.
And that intelligence, that's the hook. That's what makes them so desirable.
That's the tragic part. Their high intelligence is what makes them so sought after in the pet trade. In the wild, they form these incredibly complex, deep social bonds.
So then they're captured.
When they're captured and put into, an impoverished or isolated, stressful environment, they suffer terribly. Their vulnerability is amplified because that stress often leads to severe self-destructive behaviors.
Like feather plucking.
Most visibly, yes. Feather plucking. It essentially ruins them as pets, it shortens their lifespan, and it's a clear sign of deep psychological distress.
The sources paint a really stark picture of their conservation status. Given this demand, what protections are actually in place, and why are they? Well, why are they failing?
The African gray parrot is listed as endangered on the IUCN Red List.
Which means a very high risk of extinction in the wild.
A very high risk. And the primary threat isn't what you might first assume, like habitat loss, though that does play a role. It is illegal trafficking.
The pet trade.
An incredibly lucrative global exotic pet trade. They are cited as one of the world's most trafficked parrots And because of this catastrophic demand, it was upgraded to CITES Appendix Hend.
Right, Appendix I. That's the highest level of protection. It's essentially a total ban on all international commercial trade. Correct.
It is, unless it's for, say, scientific, non-commercial purposes, and even then, under the strictest of permits.
But as you said, declaring something illegal, it doesn't stop the trade.
If anything, it just makes it more profitable for the criminal networks involved. That's the real challenge here.
So the policy is a declaration, but the implementation.
That's the hard part. Appendix I is a necessary statement. It acknowledges the trade threatens the species' very survival, but enforcing it is a logistical nightmare. Traffickers are incredibly agile.
They find loopholes.
They move birds through countries that aren't CITES signatories, or they use transit hubs with weak customs enforcement. You have frontline conservationists facing immense challenges, from corruption at border crossings to just the sheer scale of the poaching operations in their native African ecosystems.
And we lose the bird's role in the ecosystem, too.
A critical point. They are crucial seed dispersers. They help maintain forest diversity, so their loss compromises the long-term health of the entire ecosystem. The ban basically shifts the problem underground into the black market, and that demands much more sophisticated anti-trafficking efforts, not just legal declarations on a piece of paper.
That brings us really neatly to a broader, and I'd have to say, a more optimistic concept from the sources about conservation philosophy. This idea of moving away from strict isolationism toward conservation as coexistence.
Yes.
It feels like the policy world is finally catching up to the idea that just fencing off nature doesn't work, not when human communities have lived there for millennia.
That realization is driving a monumental paradigm shift globally. The sources define this modern framing of conservation as the sustainable management of ecosystems to support both biodiversity and human well-being.
Simultaneously.
Yes, simultaneously. It's a direct response to the failures of the older, strict, what you'd call protection-based models.
Which often created conflict.
Exactly. They led to conflicts with local or indigenous communities whose traditional access to resources was suddenly just revoked.
So how does this coexistence model actually work on the ground in terms of, say, resource management or giving authority to local communities?
Well, it creates a whole spectrum of models. On one end, you still have the traditional protection-based conservation, your national parks, your strictly regulated reserves, where human activity is minimal.
The classic model.
The classic model. But on the other end, the coexistence approach champions things like community-based conservation and co-management models.
And co-management is where the government and local communities work together.
Precisely. It's where government agencies blend their official, statutory authority with the deep, long-standing indigenous or local knowledge. This allows communities to manage forests or grazing lands or fisheries using their traditional norms.
Like rotational grazing or rules about when you can harvest.
Exactly. The core principle is shared stewardship. It's the recognition that local land use, when it's managed traditionally, often is a form of conservation.
And this isn't just a theory. The sources give some powerful, tangible success stories, especially from India, where this policy blending has been really critical.
Absolutely. The primary case study is the Gura landscape in Gujarat, which is home to the Asiatic lion.
And the numbers there are just incredible.
They are astonishing. The data in the sources shows that nearly half of the entire Asiatic lion population now thrives outside the protected boundaries of the Gura National Park.
Let that sink in. A large, dangerous, apex predator population coexisting with humans. Why does this work? I mean, it seems to challenge the basic assumption that humans and lions can't occupy the same space.
It works because of the high level of tolerance shown by the local Maldari pastoralists.
They're cattle herders, right?
They are. So their livelihoods constantly intersect with the lion's hunting range. But this coexistence is rooted in a deep cultural reverence for the lion. It's not just seen as a beast, it's part of their landscape, their heritage.
So culture is the foundation.
It's essential, but it can't stand alone. It has to be backed up by infrastructure. The success relies on efficient government compensation systems that rapidly and fairly reimburse Maldaris for any loss of livestock.
Ah, so you lift the economic burden of coexistence.
When you do that and you respect the cultural values, the policy becomes viable. It proves that shared space is achievable when policy supports cultural tolerance instead of trying to suppress it.
A powerful validation. What about resource management itself, like land use practices?
For that, we can look at the Bayat villages of the Jaintia Hills in Meghalaya. Researchers there study the community-managed land use known as geome landscapes.
Which is often called slash and burn and gets a really bad rap from conservationists.
A very bad rap. It's often criticized as a driver of deforestation. However, the study of these community-managed areas revealed no detectable deforestation, no species decline.
None at all.
In fact, they even recorded new bird species for the area.
So in this context, indigenous governance was actually sustaining biodiversity better than an outside policy might have.
Yes, because the traditional governance often mandates sustainable rotation schedules, strict rules about fire management, and community-wide resource allocation that just prevents overexploitation. It proves that these models, managed by people whose very existence depends on the health of that ecosystem, can inherently sustain high biodiversity.
Without restrictive policies imposed from outside.
Exactly. It's a compelling argument for decentralizing certain conservation management functions.
A really critical insight.
Yeah.
And yet, alongside these successes, the sources also highlight species facing just immediate critical stress, often from things like climate or infrastructure pressures that can just overwhelm any local policy effort.
Of course.
We have to talk about the great Indian bustard, the jib.
The jib is a stark reminder of the challenges of coexistence when modern infrastructure clashes directly with a species' biology. It's one of the heaviest flying birds in the world, endemic to the arid and semi-arid grasslands of the Indian subcontinent. It's a magnificent creature, but ecologically, it is failing.
What are the main threats that have pushed it into these tiny, fragile pockets, mainly in Rajasthan and Gujarat?
The main threat is its own physical scale and the nature of its habitat. Because it is so large and heavy, it has poor frontal vision. It can't maneuver quickly in flight.
And the open plains where it lives
are increasingly being crisscrossed by modern infrastructure. The sources specifically point to two major man-made threats. First, collision with overhead power transmission lines.
Especially from renewable energy projects.
Exactly. The very solar and wind farms we're building to fight climate change. And second, habitat fragmentation from agriculture and mining. These birds just cannot see the thin transmission wires until it's too late. It leads to very high fatality rates.
That creates a painful policy conflict, doesn't it? The push for green energy is vital, but the infrastructure for it is directly killing an endangered species. What's the conservation response?
It's an incredibly difficult trade-off. The immediate response involves trying to underground power lines in the core jib habitats, which is hugely expensive.
Prohibitively so, I imagine.
In many cases, yes. The other option is installing diverters' visual markers on the overhead lines to make them more visible, but the effectiveness of those is still debated. And on top of that, you have intense political conflicts in places like Rajasthan over land use.
Because conservation efforts require restricting development.
And local governments might see that as an economic barrier. The fragility of this species, it nests on the ground, it's easily disturbed. It just means that any effective policy has to be highly intrusive and extremely well-funded to prevent its extinction.
And then there's the Himalayan black bear, which presents a completely different kind of stress. Climate disruption messing with its fundamental biology.
This is a perfect illustration of how subtle climate shifts can have these massive cascading ecological consequences.
So what's happening?
In the Uttarakhand region, authorities are seeing increased aggression and dangerous spikes in human-wildlife conflict with the Himalayan black bear. And the root cause is erratic weather, specifically a delayed onset of winter.
A direct symptom of climate change.
A direct symptom.
So how does a delayed winter affect the bear's behavior?
Bears are biologically programmed to enter a period of hyperphagia that's intensive eating in the late summer and fall.
To build up fat reserves for hibernation.
Precisely. They need to build up that brown adipose tissue. If winter's delayed, their natural feeding cycle gets all out of whack. Food sources that should be available might be scarce because of unpredictable rain or unseasonal warmth.
So they can't get fat enough for winter.
They fail to gain sufficient weight. This forces them to stay active longer, foraging aggressively at a time when natural resources are already depleted. And that naturally leads them right into human settlements.
Looking for food.
Targeting orchards, waste bins, even livestock. And that's where you see this spike in conflict incidents, often with tragic results for both the humans and the bears.
It's a sobering cycle. Global warming causes delayed snow, which translates directly into a dangerous encounter on a forest edge.
It's a perfect, tragic feedback loop.
Okay, before we pivot fully to global climate policy, a quick knowledge check from the sources. We mentioned several endemic species. For you listening, just to confirm, which of these are naturally found in India? Star tortoise, monitor lizard, pygmy hog, and spider monkey.
Right. The star tortoise, the monitor lizard, and the pygmy hog are all native to and naturally found in India. The spider monkey, however, is not. It's exclusively found in Central and South America.
Good to know. And it really just confirms the importance of those nuanced coexistence policies for the wealth of unique biodiversity India hosts.
It really does.
All right, let's shift gears dramatically. Let's look at how these global challenges are being managed through policy, finance, and governance. We're going from the delicate...
And one of the first things they purchase is a refrigerator, and increasingly, an air conditioner. This consumer demand combines explosively with the intensifying, longer-lasting heat wave.
Then the consequence for emissions.
It's a huge potential setback. Without strong, immediate policy intervention, cooling-related greenhouse gas emissions are projected to nearly double by 2050. We're talking about reaching 10.5 billion tons of co-Euro equivalent.
So we could decarbonize our power grids, but if we fail to manage the efficiency of our cooling, we could just nullify all those gains.
You could, essentially, yeah. This is where adaptation becomes a form of mitigation. If we allow inefficient, outdated cooling tech to proliferate, we create a massive long-term emissions liability.
And this problem is concentrated, isn't it?
Highly concentrated in developing nations, the so-called Article 5 countries. Cooling demand in these nations is expected to increase fourfold.
Which brings us to the resilience gap. You have millions of people exposed to lethal heat, but they lack the financial means or the infrastructure to adapt safely. This is where we get the hook, money for survival.
Exactly. And the financial chasm here is just immense. Current global adaptation funding meets less than 20% of the estimated global cooling resilience needs. Less than a fifth.
And why is that? Why does the money flow to mitigation instead of adaptation?
The vast majority of climate finance flows toward mitigation cutting emissions because those investments are often easier to measure, they're easier to consolidate, and they offer clearer returns.
Like building a giant solar farm.
Exactly. You can calculate the megawatts, you can calculate the return on investment. Adaptation, on the other hand, is highly local, it's diffuse, it involves complex social engineering. It's just harder to fund and scale.
And this deficit leaves millions vulnerable.
Highly vulnerable to heat-related mortality and massive productivity losses across the tropical regions of the world.
So is there any specific mechanism being set up to target this adaptation funding gap rather than just, waiting for general climate funds to trickle down?
Yes, and this is a critical development highlighted in the sources, the launch of the ARISE program. It stands for Accelerating Resilience Investments and Innovations for Sustainable Economies. It's a critical initiative by the Climate Investment Funds, or CIF.
And what makes it different?
It's designed not just to throw money at projects. It aims to mobilize what's called catalytic finance.
Catalytic finance, meaning money designed to attract other money.
Precisely. It de-risks investments to attract private capital. And, crucially, it aims to mainstream climate resilience directly into national economic planning.
Mainstreaming resilience. So that sounds like integrating climate risk assessment into everything, from building codes to national budgets.
That's exactly it. Instead of treating heat resilience as, an emergency relief issue or some environmental afterthought, ARISE aims to embed climate risk into fiscal policy and urban planning.
So a new housing development wouldn't just be about energy efficiency.
It would be about ensuring it's built to minimize heat absorption, maximize natural ventilation, and make it less reliant on those massive 58 terawatt energy surges we talked about. It's about systemic, long-term preparation, not just short-term fixes.
Okay, so moving from the financial structure of adaptation to the governance structure of global trade. The climate crisis is increasingly creating friction with international commerce, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
Things like carbon border adjustments, green subsidies, they're raising alarms. The sources mention a new mechanism created to handle these conflicts.
Yes, and this institutional development is extremely significant. It reflects the growing complexity of global policy. It's the Integrated Forum on Climate Change and Trade, or the IFCCT.
And its launch was contextualized at COP30. So what is its function? Why couldn't an existing body, like the World Trade Organization, the WTO, handle these issues?
Well, the WTO is a negotiating body. It handles dispute resolution, and it operates under very strict rules.
Non-discrimination, national treatment.
Exactly. So when a major trading bloc, like the European Union, implements a measure like the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBM.
Which is basically a carbon tax on imports.
Right. It levies a carbon price on imports based on their embedded emissions. And that instantly creates tensions. Developing countries argue that measures like CBAM are just protectionist barriers in disguise.
They feel it penalizes their industries that can't afford to decarbonize as quickly.
Yes, they fear it undermines their trade competitiveness and their economic growth.
So if the WTO handles the disputes and the UNFCCC handles the climate treaties, the IFCCT fits in the middle.
It steps right into that middle ground.
Right.
And the key structural detail, which is really important, is that the IFCCT is designed as a politically supported, non-negotiating global platform.
Non-negotiating. That's the crucial part.
It's crucial. It's a talking shop, you could say, but a highly effective one. It facilitates candid, structured dialogue outside the formal negotiation pressure of the WTO.
So a country can raise a concern without starting a formal trade war.
Precisely. If a developing country feels a rich world climate measure is unfair, they can raise it in the IFCCT without immediately triggering a formal dispute or risking a breakdown in the climate talks. It's a preventative diplomacy mechanism.
So its goal is achieving what the sources call climate trade coherence.
Yes, to make sure the pursuit of climate goals doesn't inadvertently lead to trade wars. It allows space to discuss things like technology transfer, financing for compliance, and differentiated treatment before these unilateral measures become destructive.
It's a sign of institutional maturity, really, recognizing that you have to synthesize policy, not just keep it in separate silos.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And a perfect transition to the world of frontier science, where innovation is being used to secure our fundamental digital future. Let's talk about India's major indigenous achievement in cybersecurity and quantum communication.
This is a landmark moment, a real demonstration of national technological capability. The sources detail the successful demonstration of India's first 500-kilometer quantum key distribution network, a QKD network carried out by QN Labs. And what's so critical here is that they did this over existing optical fiber infrastructure.
500 kilometers is an extremely difficult distance for quantum communication. So let's break this down. What exactly is quantum key distribution, and why is that distance so significant?
To understand QKD, you first have to understand the vulnerability of our current encryption.
Which is all based on math problems.
Right. Complex mathematical algorithms that are secure only because it would take the most powerful supercomputer we have, now millions of years, to break the key.
But quantum computers could change that.
They threaten this entire infrastructure. A powerful enough quantum computer could potentially break current encryption methods in seconds. QKD is the solution. It offers quantum-safe communication.
So how does it work differently?
Instead of math, QKD uses the fundamental immutable laws of quantum physics, specifically the uncertainty principle. The encryption key is generated and exchanged using quantum particles, usually photons, single particles of light.
Okay, so you're sending a key via single photons. What happens if someone tries to intercept them?
And that's the magic. The physics itself states that any attempt to intercept, copy, or even just observe the quantum state of that particle
It changes it.
instantly. It alters that state. It's like trying to listen to a conversation where the act of listening changes the speaker's voice. The system immediately detects the corruption.
The eavesdropping is detectable.
Guaranteed. The key is instantly discarded and a new one is generated. You have security that is built on physics, not on mathematics that could one day be broken.
That's a fantastic analogy. So back to the 500-kilometer distance. Doing this over existing fiber, what did that require?
It's a major technical hurdle. These quantum signals, these individual photons, are incredibly fragile. In standard optical fiber, they degrade and get lost very, very quickly, much faster than classical laser light.
So how do you get them to go 500 kilometers?
You need a sophisticated network architecture. It involved multiple trusted nodes. At these nodes, the signal is essentially measured and regenerated to prevent it from degrading completely.
I see. And using existing fiber is a huge advantage.
A massive one. It means you can scale this up rapidly without building an entirely new infrastructure. The sources also mentioned they integrated advanced proprietary tech, like a quantum random number generator, or QSIP, to ensure the keys are truly random and cryptographically strong.
And it was a collaboration.
Yes, the STRIDE model, a strong civil-military synergy linking research institutions, private industry like QNAV Labs, and the defense sectors.
So it's a decisive leap. It secures India's place among the leading nations in quantum-safe communication and gets it ready for, well, the next era of cybersecurity.
It absolutely does. It moves the conversation from if quantum security is necessary to how quickly we can implement it.
Sticking with the big picture, let's turn to planetary science and this really wonderful recognition of Indian contributions to the Red Planet. The International Astronomical Union, the IAU, officially approved naming several Martian features after Indian figures and locations.
This is a beautiful, enduring form of recognition, a way to cement a scientific legacy. The IAU formally approved naming a large, 3.5 billion-year-old crater on Mars after the renowned Indian geologist M.S. Krishnan,
Who was a giant in his field.
a towering figure. He was the first Indian director of the Geological Survey of India and contributed massively to our understanding of the geology of the subcontinent.
And these naming conventions are really strict, aren't they? Why was this specific crater chosen for him?
Yes, the IAU protocols are very specific. Large craters are named after deceased scientists who have made major global contributions. The size of the feature reflects the significance of the person.
And there are other names, too.
Yes, the IAU also approved 5 Kerala-based names for nearby smaller craters and a Martian valley:
Names like Valiamala, Thumba, Bakal.
Barkala and Periyar. And these smaller features are typically named after culturally relevant towns, villages, or significant natural features on Earth. It's the first time Kerala place names have been adopted for features on Mars.
It's a wonderful way to connect a specific region's cultural heritage to extraterrestrial geography. What's the scientific importance of this particular Martian region, Xanthoterra?
It's a highly studied area of Mars. It's geologically significant because researchers have identified clear, abundant evidence of ancient glacial and fluvial activity.
So signs of old rivers and maybe ice sheets.
Exactly, all dating back billions of years. Naming these specific features helps international scientists communicate more clearly when they're referring to key geological markers in this ancient watery landscape.
Fascinating. And the sources also tie this back to a deeper historical legacy of Indian astronomical observation.
They do. They cite the Kodaikanal Solar Observatory, KOTO. This observatory provides an incredible legacy, over 100 years of archival data,
Which is still being used today.
by astrophysicists worldwide. That data is crucial, for example, in helping to reconstruct the sun's polar magnetic history. So the naming of the Martian features, it doesn't just recognize the modern space program, but also India's long, sustained history of observing the cosmos.
From colonial-era observatories right up to today's quantum breakthroughs.
It's a beautiful through line.
Okay, let's bring it all the way back down to Earth for our final topic. A massive, disruptive leap in sustainability and food production. Lab-grown milk.
Right.
This is often confused with plant-based milks, but the sources are very clear that this cow-free milk is radically different.
This is a genuine biotechnological disruption. It's far beyond almond or oat milk. The sources discuss the commercial launch of lab-grown milk from an Israel-based company called Remilk.
And the key distinction is the protein.
That's the critical distinction.
Yeah.
This product contains actual molecularly identical dairy proteins, specifically casein and whey. It is milk protein, indistinguishable from what a cow produces, but made entirely without the cow.
Why is that protein component so crucial? I mean, why not just stick with the oat and soy alternatives we already have?
Because casein and whey are what give conventional milk its unique texture, its creamy mouthfeel, and, most importantly, its functional properties in cooking.
Plant proteins can't do that.
They lack the structural complexity to mimic those functions. For instance, casein is absolutely essential for making proper cheese that stretches and melts correctly, or yogurt with the right consistency. Remilk's product allows for the creation of dairy goods that are functionally identical to traditional dairy.
So it serves a market that plant-based milks just can't satisfy.
It really does.
So how does this process, this precision fermentation, actually work?
It's a masterful piece of biotech engineering. First, they identify the specific genes in a cow that are responsible for producing milk proteins, the genetic instructions for making casein and whey.
Okay.
Those genes are then inserted into tiny single-celled organisms, often specific strains of yeast or fungi.
So they're repurposing microbes into tiny factories?
Highly efficient microfactories, yes. These microbes are then grown in large, sterile, stainless steel bioreactors, very similar to what's used in brewing beer or making insulin.
And the yeast just starts making cow protein.
Yes. When these engineered microbes are fed simple nutrients like sugars, they follow those new genetic instructions, and they secrete the desired proteins, the casein and whey, into the fermentation tank.
And then you just harvest it.
You harvest the proteins, purify them, and then you formulate them with plant-based fats, vitamins, and minerals to create the final product.
And the result is lactose-free, cholesterol-free.
And hormone-free, yet it contains the exact nutritional profile, including all 9 essential amino acids of conventional milk.
The sustainability argument here must be enormous, given the vast environmental footprint of global dairy farming.
It is the single biggest driver of this technology. The sources stress that this is a dramatically climate-friendly alternative. It bypasses the need for massive herds of cattle.
Which means less land use, less water.
An estimated 95% reduction in land use, vast reductions in water consumption. And most importantly, it completely eliminates the massive methane emissions, a really potent greenhouse gas from cattle farming.
It's a solution to an ecological dilemma.
It is. It solves the problem of wanting high-quality dairy while needing to drastically curb agricultural emissions. For a huge dairy market like India, this technology represents a colossal potential avenue for sustainable food security.
Though I imagine cultural acceptance and navigating regulations will be the next big hurdle.
That's the next major phase, absolutely.
So let's circle back. We started with the extreme vulnerability of a single intelligent bird. We tracked the financial vulnerability of developing nations to lethal heat. And we ended with technological solutions for future vulnerability in our digital security and our food supply. What does this massive stack of information ultimately signify?
I think it means we're operating simultaneously at the local and the global scales. It means we recognize that the solutions have to be as nuanced as the problems themselves. Ecologically, we see this necessary pivot toward local, community-based resilience. The success of the Maldives with the Asiatic lion proves that nature thrives when human culture acts as a steward, not a jailer.
And financially?
Financially, the great threats are heat and cooling, and that requires major targeted adaptation finance like the ARISE program to stop our climate gains from being nullified.
And technologically, it's about quantum mechanics and biotech.
Technologically, survival means achieving ultimate physics-based security through quantum mechanics, while at the same time disrupting high-impact industries like food production for long-term sustainability. It is a demand for synchronous innovation across every scale.
A truly comprehensive deep dive into the nature of resilience in the 21st century.
And if we connect this all back to the bigger picture, the sheer scale of the science is what really stands out to me. We discussed QKD providing ultimate information security on Earth, guaranteed by the laws of quantum physics.
Okay.
Now, let's just briefly consider that the sources also touched upon a theoretical concept called black hole morsels.
Black hole morsels.
Tiny micro black holes whose eventual instantaneous evaporation, a process called Hawking radiation, might offer the first real measurable test of something called quantum gravity.
That seems light years away from parrots and milk. How do we connect our quest for security here on Earth to the physics of evaporating black holes?
Because the underlying physics is the same. The security of QKD rests on our understanding of how quantum mechanics governs information. The survival of humanity, securing our digital world, mitigating climate threats, redefining our relationship with nature, it ultimately depends on whether we can successfully model and apply the fundamental physics we see in the universe's most extreme conditions.
So you're saying if the quantum universe dictates perfect security here,
Can we use observations of those cosmic quantum events to build ultimate resilience there? The path to a secure future on Earth might ultimately rest on understanding the deepest secrets of the cosmos.
that is definitely something to mull over. Welcome back to the deep dive. This is it. This is the synthesis.
It is.
We have spent, an absolutely intense period just consuming everything from November 2025, a massive stack of articles, reports, analyses.
It's a lot to get through.
It is. And our mission today is not just to, review it all again. It's to refine it, to distill it all down into what we're calling your ultimate cheat sheet.
And we're moving beyond the noise here. This isn't about just remembering a list of events. This is about rapid knowledge application.
Exactly.
Because when you're under the gun, whether it's an interview or, yes, a high-stakes exam, you need two things. You need those specific, accurate facts, and you need the high-level frameworks to connect them instantly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's forge those intellectual hooks that really make this knowledge stick. I have to say, I love the structure we've landed on for this final session.
Me too, because it really gets at the heart of what's needed. We've split it into two tiers. The first is what we're calling the prelims power pack.
Yeah.
This is your rapid-fire, precise facts, the who, what, where, just for instant recall.
And the second part.
That's the mains value adds. These are the big ideas. The philosophical, the economic concepts that act as a kind of intellectual shorthand. They let you show you have a deep understanding of the material.
That's the key, I think. You stop just reading current affairs and you start using it, like a tool set.
Exactly. Knowing the IUCN status of the African gray parrot is one thing.
Sure.
Understanding how to use a concept like adaptation gap to explain why global climate finance talks are failing. That's a whole different level.
It shows you see the underlying trend, not just the single event.
Precisely. These are the connections that tie it all together.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics. Let's reinforce those concrete data points from November.
Let's do it.
All right, let's drill down. Nuts and bolts first. Specificity and accuracy. And we have to begin with climate. It just dominated everything in November.
And the one theme that just kept coming up again and again was the money, right? The massive financial shortfall.
Absolutely. The document you need to have locked in is the Adaptation Gap Report.
That's the one from UME, the UN Environment Program.
Correct. And it was a global wake-up call. It's all about the shortfall in funding for climate preparedness. And the core fact, the one for instant recall, is just stark.
What's the number?
Current adaptation funding meets less than 20% of what's needed for global cooling resilience.
Wait, less than a fifth.
Less than a fifth.
If you're a developing nation or even just living in a big coastal city, I mean, that number sounds like a death sentence. How is that even possible with all the commitments we share about?
That's the disconnect.
Yeah.
And that gap, that huge gap, it completely undermines the Paris Agreement goals for those vulnerable nations. It changes the entire conversation at climate talks.
Because it all comes back to finance.
It becomes inescapable. If less than 20% of the needed money is there, these countries can't invest in being proactive. They can't build seawalls or upgrade their infrastructure for heat waves.
So they're just stuck in a cycle of disaster response.
Exactly. Endless cycles. Which is why we saw new initiatives being launched to try and counter this. The source material pointed to one specifically.
The ARISE program.
Yes, the ARISE program, which is under the CIF, the Climate Investment Funds. And its whole purpose is to try and mainstream climate resilience into, national economic planning.
So treat it like an economic problem, not just an environmental one.
It has to be. It's an urgent global economic vulnerability now. It's not a side project anymore.
Okay, moving from global finance to endangered species. Let's talk about that incredibly smart bird we covered.
Ah, the African gray parrot. And you have to remember that description for it.
The Einstein of the bird world.
The Einstein of the bird world. Because of its intelligence, its problem solving, and its really nuanced ability to mimic speech and even grasp the concepts behind the words. It's amazing.
So for rapid recall, what are the key protective details we need to know?
Its status. It's classified as IUCN endangered. That's the International Union for Conservation of Nature. So very high risk of extinction in the wild. And crucially, it's also on CSITE's Appendix 1.
Can you just quickly remind us what Appendix I means in practical terms? It's the highest level, right?
It's the highest level of protection. CITES is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Appendix I means that any commercial international trade in wild-caught African greys is, for all intents and purposes, completely banned.
A total prohibition.
Almost total. It just reflects how devastating the illegal pet trade has been for its wild populations.
And beyond the tragedy of its numbers dwindling, why is the trafficking so bad from an ecological perspective?
Because of its role in the ecosystem. African gray parrots are incredibly important seed dispersers, especially in primary rainforests. So when you have high volumes of trafficking, you're not just losing the birds, you're disrupting the whole process of forest regeneration. The damage is systemic. It hits the ecosystem's ability to repair itself.
That idea of a systemic threat, an entire ecosystem under pressure, that connects really well to the Aravalis, closer to home. What's the core fact about them?
The Aravalis are, geologically speaking, old-fold mountains. They're ancient. And that age and their alignment is key to their function today.
Which is to act as a kind of wall.
A crucial windbreak, yes. They literally stopped the spread of sand and dust from the Thar Desert from blowing east into the plains of Haryana and Delhi.
You make it sound like they're a firewall against the desert.
They absolutely are a firewall. The sources are clear on this. If that barrier is degraded, you'll see dust storms increase, air quality plummet, agriculture suffer, far beyond just Rajasthan.
But there's a new threat. A policy issue.
A massive one. This new proposed definitional change.
The height rule.
The infamous 100-meter height rule. The idea that for a hill to qualify for protection, it has to be at least 100 meters high. Ecologists are saying this isn't a scientific metric. It's a political tool.
And the fear is what? What does it do?
The fear is that this one simple rule could exclude up to 90% of the lower hills.
90%?
And those lower hills are still a vital part of the continuous barrier.
So who wins if those hills lose their protected status?
Well, you have to look at the mining, the quarrying, the real estate lobbies. They want to exploit the land and the resources right on the edge of the NCR. If those hills are no longer protected, the firewall weakens and the risk of desertification gets much, much worse.
It's a perfect example of a tiny legislative detail having huge consequences.
Absolutely.
Okay, that takes us from environmental policy right into governance and the Constitution. Let's talk about access to justice, which is tied to a specific article.
Article 39A. This one deals explicitly with the state's duty to provide free legal aid.
And in terms of classification, it's a DPSP, a directive principle of state policy.
That's right, Part 4 of the Constitution. And being a DPSP, it's non-justiciable. You can't, sue the government to demand it in a specific case. But it's foundational. It's a guide for the state.
An ethical mandate, really.
It is. It's to ensure justice isn't denied to someone just because they can't afford it. And the reason this was in the news in November was because of the Supreme Court's push for a national judicial policy.
And what's the connection between that policy and Article 39A?
It's about making the promise of 39A a reality. The policy is about ensuring justice is both timely and accessible. Because right now, the huge backlog of cases and the high cost of fighting them, that fundamentally violates the spirit of 39A.
So the policy is about fixing the system itself.
The whole system. From court infrastructure to how cases are managed, it's all designed to make that constitutional promise real for the poorest citizen.
And while we're on high constitutional functionaries, let's quickly hit that point about the Attorney General of India, the AGI.
Yes, this is a classic exam question. It's about the rights inside Parliament.
So what can they do and what can't they do?
Okay, the AGI can take part in proceedings, can be a member of a committee, and can speak in the Lok Sabha. The one thing they absolutely cannot do is vote.
Because they aren't an elected representative, their role is purely advisory.
Exactly. And on that topic of Parliament's power, there was that reminder about international treaties.
Right, Article 253.
Article 253. The key fact is that Parliament can make laws to implement international treaties for any part of India without the consent of all the states.
A crucial central power.
Essential. If the Union had to get every single state to sign off on every treaty, foreign policy would just grind to a halt.
Okay, let's jump to tech and infrastructure. The conversation around critical minerals was huge. What are the key examples we need to remember?
The two big ones are lithium and cobalt. Their importance is just. It's impossible to overstate. They are the absolute backbone of the green energy transition.
For EVs, obviously, but also for grid storage.
Crucially, for grid storage. The sources specifically mention technologies like vanadium redox flow batteries, or VRFBs.
How are they different from, say, a regular lithium-ion battery?
A VRFB is designed for large stationary storage. It's perfect for stabilizing the grid when you have intermittent renewables like solar and wind. A lithium-ion battery is more about weight and size for a car. The geopolitical fight over lithium and cobalt directly impacts our ability to build that stable green grid.
Which is why the source used that very specific phrase, strategic vulnerabilities of global critical mineral supply chains.
Precisely. Because if one or two countries control the mining or the processing, the whole world's green transition is held hostage. It's a massive national security issue now.
And speaking of national security and tech, we have to talk about that quantum achievement.
A huge one. India's first successful demonstration of a 500-kilometer quantum key distribution network, QKD.
This was by QNU Labs, and 500 kilometers. That's a massive distance for this kind of tech. Why is it so significant?
Well, QKD is really the future of secure communication. Traditional encryption is like a really, really strong lock, but a supercomputer might eventually break it. QKD is different. It uses quantum physics. The basic idea is that if you observe a quantum particle, you change it. So if an eavesdropper tries to intercept the key, the quantum state collapses, and both the sender and receiver know instantly.
So it's not just that it's hard to break, it's that you know immediately if someone is even trying.
Instant detection. That's the game changer. And achieving a 500-kilometer range is a monumental engineering feat because these quantum signals are so fragile. It shows India can deploy a secure network using existing fiber optic cables. And that puts us in a very elite club of nations.
Okay, let's round out the power pack. A quick fact check on drinking water pollutants.
The two that cause the most widespread public health issues in India are arsenic and fluoride. They're naturally occurring, which makes them a huge ongoing challenge for providing clean water in many parts of the country.
And one last geographic point to lock in, the Narmada River.
Right. It's unique because it flows west, when most other big peninsula rivers flow east. The reason is purely geological. It flows in a linear rift valley, which is basically a sunken block of crust, and it's trapped between the Vindhyas and the Satpuras mountain ranges. That geology forces it to flow west.
Excellent. Okay, that's a really solid consolidation of the facts. But like you said at the top, that's only half the battle.
Only half.
Perfect. We have the data sealed. So now we shift gears. We're moving beyond just asking what happened to analyzing what does this mean.
This is where we need to arm you with the right vocabulary, the mains value adds. These are the phrases that connect these events to the big, ongoing structural themes.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because you take an isolated fact like an SC ruling or a stock market high, and you connect it to this broader philosophy. This is the synthesis that really shows deep understanding.
Let's get into it.
Let's start with a really big one from polity, transformative constitutionalism. That is a heavy concept. What's the fundamental idea we should hold on to?
At its core, it's the idea that the Constitution isn't just a static legal rulebook from 1950.
Not just a dusty old document.
Not at all. The judiciary sees it as a dynamic, living instrument, a tool to achieve fundamental social and political change. Its whole purpose is to overcome the historical injustices and inequalities that the other branches of government might be too slow to fix.
So it's a philosophy that justifies the court stepping in when, say, the legislature is stuck in gridlock.
Precisely. In a society with such deep structural inequalities, the Supreme Court often feels it has to step in to enforce those basic promises of justice and equality. This philosophy is the engine behind judicial activism.
And the Supreme Court's actions in November gave us perfect examples of this in action. Let's talk about the separation of powers.
The first, and maybe the most direct example, was the court striking down key parts of the Tribunal Reforms Act, 2021. And this wasn't just some procedural thing. This was a high-stakes defense of judicial independence itself.
Which is a part of the basic structure doctrine.
A core component.
Right.
From Parliament's perspective, they're just passing a law, which is their job. But the court pushed back hard.
What was the specific tension there?
The tension was that the court said Parliament was essentially trying to reenact provisions that the court had already struck down as unconstitutional. They were just repackaging them. So the court insisted that Parliament can't just bypass constitutional checks like that.
So under transformative constitutionalism, the court is protecting the tool itself, protecting its own independence so it can continue to do its work.
That's a perfect way to put it. You have to protect the integrity of the institution so it can fulfill its role as the guardian of rights.
And what was the second example? The one dealing with the friction in federal governance.
This is so critical for center-state relations. It was the SE's ruling on the governor's power to assent to bills under Article 200.
Right.
The court was emphatic. It said that prolonged, unexplained, indefinite inaction by a governor on a bill passed by a state legislature is fundamentally unconstitutional.
That seems like a really important check, especially when the governor and the state government are from different political parties.
It's the judiciary stepping in to make sure the machinery of democracy doesn't just get jammed by partisan politics. The court is saying that constitutional processes have to serve the people's elected will, not obstruct it. They can't be used as a political veto weapon through indefinite delay.
Okay, moving from polity to society. There's a sharp new term for modern inequality. Digital apartheid. That is a very strong phrase. What does it really mean?
It's a term used to describe the widening chasm between the digital haves and have-nots. And the key is that this divide isn't random. It mirrors and, in fact, deepens the existing socioeconomic and caste divisions.
So it's about more than just who has a smartphone.
Oh, much more. It's about who has reliable high-speed internet, who has the digital literacy to use it, who can actually leverage digital services for education, for health, for banking. The source material specifically talked about the digital divide across caste and class.
So if everything from your health records to your subsidies is delivered digitally and you don't have good access, you're cut off.
You are systematically excluded. And that systemic exclusion affecting hundreds of millions of people is why the term digital apartheid is warranted in a serious analysis. The gap in quality is huge.
And what's the policy response to this? How does the Regional Open Digital Health Summit fit into this?
The official response is to build inclusive digital public infrastructure, or DPIs.
Like Aadhaar and UPI.
Exactly. The summit was all about building these interoperable, people-centric systems like the Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, specifically to try and bridge this gap.
Yeah.
The idea is to create these common digital rails that everyone can access.
But there's a flip side to that, right? There are huge concerns.
Absolutely. The rise of DPIs brings up major questions about data privacy, about surveillance, about exclusion by design. If your biometric doesn't work or the network is down, you're not just inconvenienced, you are excluded from essential services.
So any good analysis has to look at both the promise and the peril.
You have to. You have to weigh the potential for inclusion against the very real risk of creating new forms of digital segregation.
Okay, let's turn to the economy. We've talked for years about jobless growth, but the sources are suggesting we need an even more alarming term, job loss growth. What's the difference?
Jobless growth is when GDP goes up, but employment stays flat. Job loss growth is much worse. It's when GDP goes up, but formal, salaried, high-quality employment actually declines.
So it's an active degradation of the job market.
It is. The jobs are being replaced by precarious, informal, or self-employed roles that have very little social security. It's not just that new good jobs aren't being created. The existing ones are disappearing.
And we saw this play out in the financial news from November. The stock market looked amazing, but the labor market seemed fragile.
That contrast is the perfect analytical hook. The Sensex and Nifty were hitting record highs, driven by a few big companies. But at the same time, surveys show this rise in self-employment and gig work.
So wealth is being created, but not quality employment for the many.
That's the fear, that the formal economy is becoming incredibly efficient at shedding labor. And it's why the NSSO needs to update its classification of occupations so we can even properly track what's happening with all these new forms of work.
So if that's the problem, what's the policy solution?
Well, the major policy hook is microeconomic empowerment, specifically through something like the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, the NRLM.
Which focuses on mobilizing rural women into self-help groups, or SHGs.
Exactly. It's about supporting self-employment and enterprise creation from the bottom up. It accepts the reality that the formal sector isn't creating enough jobs and focuses on building resilience at the community level.
And the numbers from the sources were incredible.
The scale is immense. Over 10 crore women mobilized. And the financial discipline is what's really stunning. The SHGs have a 98% repayment rate on their loans.
98% on billions in credit.
It's the model. It's group-based collateral, social pressure, and collective responsibility. It proves to be far more effective than traditional top-down lending in these contexts. It doesn't solve the whole formal employment crisis, but it's a proven way to improve livelihoods and economic agency for millions.
Let's bring it back to the environment. We started with the adaptation gap report, but let's use the term adaptation gap as a proper analytical hook now. What does it help us explain?
It helps us explain the fundamental failure in global climate talks and why developing nations are so often frustrated. The adaptation gap is that conceptual difference between the protection needed from climate change and the protection that's actually being funded or implemented.
So it gets at the why of the failure.
Exactly. The root cause is the insufficient adaptation finance, that less than 20% number. And the implication of that is huge. It forces developing nations to stay stuck in the old paradigm.
Which is just disaster response and relief. Right. They're constantly spending their money after the flood or the cyclone hits. They can't make that crucial shift to the new paradigm of mitigation and proactive resilience building. They can't afford to build the flood-proof housing or the resilient energy grids.
They're trapped in a reactive cycle.
A cycle dictated by that funding gap. And the launch of that ARISE program we mentioned, that's a direct response to this pressure. It's the world's financial bodies finally admitting that adaptation has to be a core part of economic strategy, not just some small environmental project.
Before we wrap up the mains hooks, let's quickly touch on a few other high-value concepts that came up. First, in conservation.
The idea of conservation is coexistence. This is a really profound shift away from the old fortress conservation model, where you just kick people out of a protected area.
And the example for this was the Asiatic lions, right?
Yeah.
The perfect example. Nearly half of them now live outside the Gir National Park, thriving alongside the Muldari communities there. The new policies are trying to formalize this, mandating consent from local communities before any relocations for new tiger reserves.
So it acknowledges that local stewardship can actually work.
And sometimes work better. It tries to balance conservation with the rights of people under the Forest Rights Act.
Okay, and on the security front, there was a shift in defense doctrine.
Yes, moving beyond the older cold start concept towards something more like cold strike. This is about proactive, decisive deterrence. faster mobilization for limited operations.
And this is operationalized through things like the Rudra brigades.
Exactly. These are smaller, faster, self-contained battle groups that combine tanks, infantry, artillery, everything into one unit that can be deployed very quickly. It's a strategic shift towards readiness and decisive limited action.
Finally, back to pure science, the gravitational wave discovery.
GW 250111. The connection here is to a fundamental concept in physics: black hole thermodynamics.
The principle to hold on to is that the total surface area of a black hole's event horizon can never decrease. It's analogous to the second law of thermodynamics, that entropy always increases. This gravitational wave observation helped confirm that principle. It connects the discovery to the most fundamental laws of our universe.
That is fantastic. A synthesis across polity, society, economy, and even deep space physics, all anchored in November's context.
And now you have the vocabulary to analyze it.
All right, you've done the heavy lifting, you've consumed all the content, and now we have delivered that final high-impact distillation. We didn't just give you the facts, we gave you the frameworks.
This is your condensed, actionable synthesis. This cheat sheet is designed to give you that mental flexibility to use these powerful concepts: transformative constitutionalism, digital apartheid, adaptation gap, and apply them accurately when you're under pressure.
November 2025 is sealed. You now have the hooks to recall this entire month. From the sub 20% funding shortfall in that report to the role of the African gray parrot as a seed disperser.
But we have to leave you with one final thought, a challenging one, based on a principle we touched on: intergenerational equity.
The idea that we, the current generation, are trustees of the earth. We have a duty to preserve environmental quality and resources for the future.
And a challenge, revealed in the November sources, isn't just about forests or water. It's about a vital public health resource. The reports showed this terrifying, rising threat of superbugs.
Bacterial strains with critically high resistance to our last-line antibiotics, like carbapenems.
And this isn't some far-off threat. The sources cited specific, alarming stats. For some common infections, the susceptibility to these drugs is already dangerously low. In some ICU infections, resistance is as high as 91%.
These drugs are a shared global resource. They're what make complex surgeries and even cancer care possible.
Once they fail, we are functionally back in the pre-antibiotic era.
So given this rapid loss of efficacy, a loss accelerated by misuse, it raises a really profound question based on the reality of November 2025's health reporting. Are we fulfilling our trust for future generations? Or are we consuming their ability to survive common infections by allowing the rise of these untreatable superbugs?
That's a challenge of equity, technology, and governance for you to mull over.
If this helps you sleep better, knowing your current affairs coverage is consolidated, analyzed, and ready for application, please hit join. It costs less than a coffee, but powers our entire operation. To our members, you are appreciated. Everyone, like, share, and comment below. What is your target year for UPSC? This is Simplified UPSC by PPP. Dream big, stay consistent. Jai Hind.